That's a good song.
I enjoy that.
Yeah, you can do it.
Okay. Okay, we are live.
Okay. Are you finished with your introduction? I call the Middleton Community as a whole meeting for January 27th to order. With roll call, please.
Alder Nero.
Here.
Alder Wilkins.
Here.
Alder Ramsey. Here. Alder Nelson.
Here.
Mayor Farrar. Here. Alder Wilson.
Here.
Alder Coombs.
Here.
Alder Crowe. Here. Alder Pizarro is absent and he's here.
Moving on to the item number 1, we have a presentation on funding opportunities and sustainability by Kathy Coombs, Director of the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to come and talk about all of this exciting opportunities on the horizon. So I'm with the Office of Energy and Climate Change. If folks don't know, we're an office County Executive Joe Creasy created inside his office in 2017. And really we focus on two things. We're supporting efforts to achieve the county's carbon neutral in our own facility fleet and land operations by 2025. And then we're also leading that countywide effort to reduce emissions consistent with the climate action plan we produced in 2020. So a lot of our work is in conjunction with local governments, with community-based groups and others really to try to achieve those objectives. And I've got our website up there and stuff if you want to get into a little bit more of what we do. I can't start this talk without acknowledging the really important role Middleton plays in our work. Because you are one of the communities that is spurring and inspiring other communities. In fact, yesterday I moderated a panel at the Renew Wisconsin Summit, and the city of La Crosse talked about how they are copying your TIP strategy, you know, and that really that's what we do as local governments. We see great ideas and we copy them. So a thing I want you to really hear from me. You know, I did a blog in December before I knew I was coming to this because Kelly Hilliard had done a presentation for a group I'm involved in. And it was just like, okay, Middleton is leading in so many ways. We did a blog about all the ways you guys are leading. One of the, just out of that whole list, the one I want to say out loud, because we'll come back to this in other ways, is your sustainability committee's engagement with the community and efforts to actually spur action on the ground is completely unprecedented, and I talk about it all the time when I'm in Stoughton or Mount Horeb or somewhere else. I'm like, well, you know, what the Middleton committee does. Wow, that's kind of cool. So really, you've been for easily as long as our office has been around, one of the communities that are getting important things done in a way that are inspiring other communities to follow your lead. So that puts you in a pretty incredible position when we're talking about these opportunities forward. Because we're at this moment where in an unprecedented way, the federal government is going to start helping you get these things done. Okay? And so there are like two big bills involved in this. The first is the bipartisan infrastructure law. So sometimes people call it IIJA, and increasingly locally, people are calling it bill. This whole Bill and Ira thing are our new wealthy uncles who are, So the infrastructure piece of this is a very kind of traditional federal funding bill. There are funds that are going to flow to states and communities through direct allocations based on size or population or whatever, and there are competitive grants here, and it is focused on infrastructure. So our state energy office is going to get additional funds, our low-income weatherization program will get additional funds, kind of those traditional pieces is what's, by itself, bill would have been a big thing for us to adjust to and move forward. But then, we also, last summer, had the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. And IRA is completely unprecedented. This is close to $400 billion, and 2/3 of it is tax credits. And tax credits don't flow by allocation to states or localities. They flow where people take advantage of them. And more people take advantage of them, there will be more tax credits and more economic activity or less economic activity. So it's a really different paradigm. Fundamentally, I have a picture of carrots there because what the Inflation Reduction Act did was really create a lot of carrots to make clean energy cheaper than dirty energy. Fundamentally, that's what it's doing. It's providing 10 years of tax credits so that there's certainty for the market. That's going to help things evolve. People aren't going to wonder if the tax credit will be around next year. And it has Buy American and Build American provisions, so it's really about economic development in a lot of ways. There's just a big bushel of carrots for us. So what does that mean for a local community? You know, when I've been talking about this, I'm saying, okay, there are going to be incredible opportunities here for your own operations, for you to be thinking about the Middleton facilities and what you can do in addition to what you've already done. There are also, though, here a lot of community-wide opportunities. There are opportunities for businesses and residents and landlords, and I think Middleton is because you sustainability committee that does a booth at the Good Neighbor Festival and hands things out, you're already a little bit ahead of the game thinking about how you're going to leverage this than folks who've never done very much of that outreach. So let's talk first about the money for municipal projects. So under the Inflation Reduction Act, historically, there were renewable energy tax credits. If you were a business, you could get a tax credit. Big thing under the IRA is that they invented this new thing they're calling direct pay, where people who don't pay taxes, whether that's local governments, school districts, nonprofits, will essentially be able to file a form with Treasury and say, we did $1 million project and get a check back for $300,000. And I want to be really clear, that is not a grant. Okay, that doesn't mean that Abby or Kelly has to fill out a grant application and then do quarterly reports and all. This is a one-time report at the end of the project, and you get the cash. One of the really important things, you know, as we're learning about the IRA and the rules are evolving, if you're financing the project with tax-exempt bonds, the credit is 15%, not 30%. That wasn't the most popular thing I told my county controller in the past month. But it is and there's no cap on that, okay? So the project is as big as the project is. There's also a 30% credit for electric vehicles, which includes like electric lawnmowers at the commercial scale for a community. I mean, so lots of opportunities there. Light duty, heavy duty vehicles that also qualifies for direct pay. And then there are also credits for energy efficiency. Now those don't qualify for the direct pay. You have the ability to transfer the credit to the design firm and cut some deal with them. Kind of, it's a little bit more complicated. And we're all anxious to see how the IRS explains that's gonna work going forward. But there are a bunch of opportunities here. And, as we talked about these at Dane County for our own operations, as you think about whether it's an efficiency project or another solar project or fleet electrification, this is a potential to invest capital dollars in a project and then get, a few months later, a big check from Treasury that essentially comes back into our operating budget. And we might buy down our capital costs with that, but it's also a little bit of levy limit relief that we could figure out how to use most effectively in our operations. That part my controller would like. Actually, he taught me that part of it, let's be fair. But so there, and these tax credits are here for 10 years. So this is really the time to think about what are those opportunities that we want to go after? So that's the piece inside your operations. Now, businesses, schools, nonprofits are all eligible for those tax credits too. So there's all of the opportunity across the community. Who else can benefit from this? And you and your constituents can layer focus incentives here. So you can get the tax credit and also focus on energy incentive, or a business could use PACE financing. So we're talking about no money up front, getting that big rebate from the feds. Some really good opportunities there. On the residential side, there's also really a bunch of opportunities here. So there are tax credits that are available right now for homeowners that are up to $1,200 a year plus a separate $2,000 one for heat pumps. And then starting in 2024, at some point in 2024, there will be a grants program and an electrification program that will really target low and moderate income households. And it will work for landlords as well as homeowners, but to try to make sure that we're, one of our risks in all of this is that we move forward the folks who can move forward into an all-electric future, and we leave behind some of our communities, and now they're the only ones paying for a gas infrastructure. That's not going to turn out well. So there are really deliberate programs coming. Now those grant programs are going to be designed at the federal level. We think maybe by this summer, the feds will say to the states, these are the parameters, and then the states will have to design their version of the program to implement in the state. We're hopeful that that's all going to run through Focus on Energy, so it's like one program that does everything, not two separate programs, but that's not confirmed anywhere yet. Households can also qualify for the renewable energy tax credit. They can also qualify for electric vehicle tax credits. And for the first time now, we've got an EV credit on used vehicles too. So we're expanding that market. There is, and I've got a link there, a really cool calculator that a national nonprofit, Rewiring America, created, where you put in your zip code and your tax filing status, and it will do this calculation of what all of those tax credits you can qualify for. And of course, that's pending how these programs ultimately come down, but it's a nice way to get just a sense. I encourage you to check it out. Play with it with different income levels and go, oh, that's really interesting. A household like that is going to really benefit from that new electrification work. So I want to highlight maybe a couple of things that I know are important issues to us regionally that the IRA is going to play a significant role in. And the first of these, as local governments, we've been talking for a while at a statewide basis, Kelly is in these conversations, about how we really get energy efficient affordable housing. And there are a few things here. So there are some new tax credits for builders that will encourage them to build more efficient housing. That's a really good thing that I think is going to come here. There's new money for weatherization and the new grants programs. So I think, we're as local governments on a kind of statewide basis thinking about how do we leverage these pieces? Are there maybe competitive grants that we could apply for as local governments across Wisconsin to sort of accelerate models? I think, I appreciate the work that Middleton and a few other communities across the state are doing to experiment with models right now, because you're getting some experience, and I know Madison's getting some experience with what it really takes to move landlords, and that's gonna help when we apply for federal funds to say we've tried this and this worked and this didn't work versus the folks who just have a great idea that hasn't ever been tried anywhere. So that's sort of one of the areas we're paying a lot of attention to. We're also paying a lot of attention to EV charging infrastructure, because we want clean fuel vehicles in the future. Folks are anxious about, is there enough charging to go where I want to go? The state will get $78 million to put charging along sort of those major highways across the state. That's going to be those yellow circles there are where we have high-speed charging right now that's really along interstates or something. See, there's lots of places where there's not coverage yet, but that's going to take care of that piece. We know there's another gap in terms of folks who maybe don't have garages where they can plug in or other things, and there will be a second wave, this is under the infrastructure bill, of EV funding, looking at, what do communities need to shore up charging inside communities. The Greater Madison MPO has launched an effort to sort of try to figure out what's the EV charging infrastructure across Dane County, where are the gaps, where does that fall in terms of social justice communities and other things, and so they have like a draft outline for a plan, and we're participating in that to make sure it's countywide, because it's important to me that we have a solution that is countywide, not just some segment of that. So I think, you're gonna hear more about that as those efforts evolve. There are some tax credits under the IRA for EV charging, but they're for non-urban areas and low-income areas, and it's kind of restricted. I kind of don't think we're gonna see, that doesn't feel like a tax credit that is gonna be very broadly adopted. In general, we're big in our office on cross-community efforts. We still point frequently to the community energy planning that Middleton led back starting in 2019. They've got 7 of our Dane County communities to get energy plans. We have this thing called the Sustainable Leaders Collaborative, where we bring local governments and school districts across the county together regularly to encourage planning and collaboration. And, so we're thinking about sort of all of the ways we could do cross-community things, particularly with maybe competitive funds under the infrastructure. So things on our radar, I talked about regional housing. We have a group looking at tree canopy across the county and what we do in that realm. You participated in the natural disaster hazard mitigation plan. There's some maybe opportunities there on the resilience side to access. We've been having a conversation slowly about streetlight upgrades. We think there might be money to accelerate that discussion at some moment. So like lots of pieces there. What I keep saying to those SLC members is for the next 2 to 3 years, we're gonna have these opportunities sort of come out as DOE and EPA kind of get them all processed. It's gonna probably take that long. So, my big message everywhere is the IRA is really a game changer for us. It's like, I really feel like a superhero flew in here and we're like, okay, Kathy, you couldn't get like more money from Focus on Energy or some of these other things, but look, here we go. We're gonna give you guys a lot more resources to get things done, but we have to take advantage of that. That's an if. It's sort of this superhero with a catch. So it's super important for us to be thinking about how do we integrate the IRA into our planning? What are the things on your wish list that you haven't been able to do that this creates new math around? You know, so really looking at those internal things, and of course, our office is always here to help connect you to other people, try to figure out where there might be examples. But then, and again, you guys have done some of this, how do you leverage this to spur that community-wide action? You have community-wide goals. This is the best moment for businesses in Middleton, for residents in Middleton to be thinking about solar, to be thinking about heat pumps. And so how do we do that together? And you know, we're thinking a lot about this. So we published, as of this week, some new web pages about the federal funding with links for residents and links for businesses. Everything isn't there yet, but we're committed to keeping that updated as things evolve, because regular people can't spend the time it takes to figure out where on the IRS website there's a description of this that is in quasi a language we can understand, kind of thing. So we're doing that summary, but we're also really actively starting to think about how we can package information into bite-sized pieces and share it out with our partners. So in February, spoiler, our theme in February is the direct pay. We're gonna do some social media around that. We're gonna do some other things to like increase everybody's awareness that, hey, if you're a nonprofit, you can suddenly get essentially tax credits even though you're not taxable, because that's a hard concept for people to wrap their heads around. So we're gonna each month have sort of a theme that we flow out through all of our partners where you can share it to folks. I would love, and you know, I'm just because you guys are like, I think the council who would do this, it would be awesome if you took our little thing and put it in your newsletters to constituents, you know, that, because people are gonna need to hear this 3 or 4 times before they act, and so if they hear it from a trusted elected official and they saw it maybe in their church newsletter and they also saw it on, you know, our post, it starts to add up and we start to see the action we need to see there. So, you know, I think we are well poised in Dane County to take advantage of all of this and really rock these incentives. So that's what I think we're going to do. Thank you.
Yeah, I would start. So Kathy, great job to begin with. So in terms of effectiveness, are you going to prioritize 1, 2, 3, 4, and also the ease of convenience people doing it? Because there's a lot more pile of money in one area than the others. And then I also like you to comment on you said the tree canopy. I think that's awesome. You know, is there any effort there to plant more trees? Because, you know, there are a lot of areas which could use them. And, you know, when you look at maybe planting 50 trees equal to having 1 EV. So yes, some thoughts.
Sure.
Prioritizing and then
Yeah.
canopy.
Yeah, I think, and the prioritizing is a terrific question. I really think this year, our priority is which things are available now that we can start talking about. So I spent the first 25 years of my career in energy efficiency, so I would always say efficiency before solar. But you know what? The solar money is on the table already and it's available, and we have data that sometimes people install solar and that inspires them to go back and do the efficiency. So I think we're in a kind of opportunistic moment where we have to prioritize the things that are available from the federal government, and the tax credits are easier for the federal government to set up than the programs, so the tax credits are sort of all happening up front. In January, we did a kind of limited push out of the tax credits for homeowners, and we'll probably do some more work around that at points. But we're a little bit opportunistic in how we're approaching this right now. just because we can't control the whole agenda. I think next year we'll be able to do that a little bit differently because hopefully more of the programs will be standing up. On the tree canopy, so like a year ago now, we saw some data from CARPC, the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission, that showed really clearly how much tree canopy we're losing in Dane County. They're leveraging some aerial data to estimate tree canopy, and it prompted us to start convening folks to talk about, well, so what are we going to do about this in Dane County? And that group is really figuring out how to sustain the tree canopy we have, but also grow it back with a real eye toward equity, because we know we have certain neighborhoods in our communities that are largely treeless. So they've started to do a little bit of work piloting tree planting efforts locally. I can tell you the challenge we see isn't like we can get the trees, we can get people to volunteer to plant them, but trees need love and care for the first 5 years of their life, and we're still trying to figure out how do we create maybe like a tree adoption program. You know, how do we have someone who cares about those trees so that they survive? And that piece is still, that group is, you know, they're doing some piloting and they're trying to figure that out. But yeah, I was stunned at in the tree loss, I should say, part of it is disease. You know, we've had several layers of really significant disease, and a piece of it is certainly development too, but the disease piece really devastated a bunch of our wooded areas.
Thanks, Kathy, great presentation, and thanks for all you do for the county. You mentioned that some programs are subject to state action. I'm mindful of what happened with Medicaid expansion and high-speed rail, and so I'm wondering, are any of those the ones that would benefit municipalities?
So so a number of things are going to run through the state energy office, and I think it's not entirely clear where the legislature might get involved in that, like the residential rebate programs that are going to run through the state. We sort of think that's going to be like the state energy office funding, and nothing's going to happen there. But like the green revolving loan fund, that might seem like a kind of new thing, and that might like end up having some review by the legislature at some point. Or, you know, I think there's a little bit of TBD because some of this is stuff that we haven't had before. But that's what folks have suggested to me, that those residential rebate programs probably won't be subject to some rules committee or something, but other things that are a little bit newer and different than what we do. You know, some states have a green bank. That revolving loan fund could be conceived as a green bank of some sort. That feels like something that might hurt the ears of a legislative committee.
Yeah, I really appreciate your insights and coming today. I was thinking about the tree canopy, but I have a question for Abby. So Abby, before I talk about the tree canopy, do we have any plans for solar, like anything we can retrofit? Like that was always a wish list item, or maybe in 2 or 3 years. Do we have anything that's kind of ready to go?
Well, we have 3 solar projects that are in the budget right now, 2 at well stations and then 1 at the Pleasant View Golf Course. I'm sure that there are a lot of private development options too. I'm just thinking of, you know, every new building that's gone up recently that doesn't have solar, that's a missed opportunity. But maybe now is the time to go back and work with those building owners to retrofit those. Kelly, do you have anything else you know that would be ready to go?
Well, in 2020, Slipstream analyzed our building stock for city operations. And some of the buildings that we have weren't good candidates, like the senior center has so much on its roof that you would have to just start over with that for it to work. And then the community campus, there was question on whether City Hall would remain or be taken down. So we didn't want to put solar there. So most of that analysis has already been mapped out, and they suggested that we work on utility well pump areas. But a lot of those areas don't have a lot of space. So there's not endless solar that we could do with city government buildings. But I think we should focus on, if we do any new building with that community campus, to start thinking about that early, what we want to do, because there'll be those tax rebates, incentives, focus on energy programs to help bring down costs of the more innovative stuff.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you, Abby. As for the tree canopy, it did strike me because one of the earliest things that I saw, I was on workforce development in 2017 before I got on council, and we approved as a committee, I think it's 6 houses on Gateway, and they're beautiful. They're single family homes. They're affordable, starting at 400,000. But the reason that the surrounding neighbors were so upset before it was built was not because we were offering affordable housing, it's because they cut down 30 old trees. They weren't diseased. And it was, some developers had come in and then sold it, and then, but there's still animosity about it. And it made me think if there's a way, and this is something for us to think about someday, if somebody's cutting down trees, if they have to then plant so many trees to replace it as part of that bill. But then there comes into are you affecting affordable housing because now you're forcing the tree planting? And then the second thought is they could plant seedlings for $1, but that's not going to be a successful tree. So as you look at the canopy, it's not always a 1-for-1 because you get some loss. But truly, it was a completely shaded neighborhood, and just completely gone. And those houses are lovely. Those homeowners did not choose to take the trees down. But as a city, we can think about ways to be creative. And that unfortunately, after the 2018 flood, we lost a ton more trees in the district because they were not flood-proof. So it is something that the city is working on. And I've seen especially the parks do a lot more plantings that can handle the floods to try to make up for it. And we do applaud the efforts of our staffers for that. So far, so.
Anyone else? I just want to make a comment, Kathy. I've seen your presentation several times. You're going to apply some that really appreciate it. One comment you made is that Dane County, you're putting together a website with all these resources for people that have a place to go. And we'll definitely, I'm sure, in Middleton, be tracking people to that, because having these quick places to go and find the information is important. And I just want to say, we have to make sure Kelly, your work there, that we're able to let you capitalize on these and give you the opportunity and the tools to make sure that we're exploiting everything we can for every. So. Anyone else? Thank you, Kathy. Really appreciate it. That will bring us to an update on the Civic Campus project front. And Kathy, take it away. Oh, sorry. It probably fell down. Oh, yeah. This one, this is that one. Okay.
I'd like to make it early because thank you, everybody. I'm Abby Toon. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development for the City of Middleton. And I would like to give you all an update on the status of our community campus plan, which, as our other people know, we put that project on hiatus during the pandemic for a couple of years. And it has been a little bit slow to start back up, I think primarily because Our staff has been reluctant to fully engage the consulting firm that we have involved in the project because there's a limited number of hours remaining on the contract, and we want to make sure that we know exactly what it is that the city needs before we fully bring them back into the fold. So just a little bit of history on the project. In 2019, the City Council approved funding for a community campus plan for downtown Middleton. And we had outlined 6 primary goals for that plan. And then last year, our community campus committee updated those goals slightly. So I'm showing both versions. The updated ones are in red. The plan goals are to identify opportunities to modernize and or replace the city's current public facilities in downtown where needed and appropriate, to identify opportunities for more efficient utilization of land through combined facilities, flexible spaces that can serve more than one purpose, and underground or shared parking opportunities to ensure first and foremost, that our municipal facility space needs are met and can accommodate the future population growth of the city, to identify opportunities for private development, and to enhance downtown Middleton. And then lastly, and the biggest change that we made was we want to be sure that our plan aligns with the city's approved sustainability goals for the civic campus. Those are different than what we had originally outlined because there is a document specific to the campus now. And you can find all of the documents related to the community campus plan on our city website, cityofmiddleton.us/CCC, and that includes the sustainability goals. So this map is showing in a blue cross-hatched area the lands that are city-owned in downtown. We mostly have left out the tourism depot because their space needs are met right now with their facility. They just underwent some minimal renovations last year. And also that depot is a nationally designated historic landmark, so we wouldn't anticipate any changes to that building. The plan has mostly focused on the surface parking lots as well as the senior center building, city hall, and the public library. One of the things that was really important when we were outlining the scope for this plan is that we wanted to make sure that it would consider the larger context of the downtown and the city, not just the city municipal needs. So also in 2019, the city selected SEH. We held a competitive RFP process, and SEH partnered with Epstein Ewan Architects and Fendorf for this project. So that is the consulting firm team that they're working on. And then the city also appointed a 9-member community campus committee, and the membership is shown there. They represent several different aspects of the city and their involvement. And then we had a 2-phase process for the community campus plan. The first phase was to identify the space needs for our government facilities. That involved several different opportunities for public engagement, including an All Our Ideas survey, some data gathering and analysis. We did a Sunday stroll where we dragged a wagon with clipboards around downtown and Lakeview Park and asked people for their thoughts. We had stakeholder meetings, and then our consultants put together a recommended range for our municipal space needs. And that range was 154,000 to 180,000 square feet total. And that portion of the project has not yet been approved. So that was recommended, but it has not yet been approved. The second phase in the project was additional public input, programming, and developing concepts and cost estimates for what these new civic buildings could look like. And I don't want to focus a lot of attention on the 3 concepts that the consulting firms came up with because we are strongly anticipating that these are going to change quite a bit. But they had outlined a few different options for consideration. The first one was the hub, and that was a new community building on the library and library parking lot sites. The building was to include underground parking, a first floor intergenerational center and library with a shared lobby in the center, a small city hall reception area on the ground floor. The library was to occupy the western half of the site as well as the entire fourth floor. And the intergenerational center would occupy the eastern half on the first and second floor. City Hall was to be entirely contained on the eastern half of the third floor, and then that would open up other sites, which are shown in that translucent lilac color, and those would be for private development or other purposes. The second idea was the Helm. It is very similar to the Hub. It's on the same site as the Hub, but it shrunk the overall size of the intergenerational center and the library. And that was in order to provide at-grade parking that would be hidden beneath the building. And one of the things that we did hear pretty commonly during public engagement is that the seniors in particular do not want to go below grade to park. They wanted to have at-grade parking available specific to the senior center. And then the third idea was called the Heart, and it placed a new civic building on the site that is currently City Hall and the adjacent green space and parking lot. The Heart would have City Hall occupying the land that currently houses the senior center and then building new on the spaces that would be redeveloped. It would have underground parking, the first and second floor would be library, intergenerational center, and shared space. And then the third and a stepped back fourth floor would be library. Again, I don't want to get into a lot of details because I really think that what we need are some revisions to the concepts. So I'll go further into that. Our consultants also prepared an initial cost estimate for us for any of the three options, and they estimated 2020 a range of $51 million to $72.5 million, and in 2025 estimate of $60 to $84 million. We know with the cost of construction, those figures for 2025 are probably low at this point. So that will need to be updated. And then also, we worked with Bill Burns to put together some different funding strategies that can be used to help to fund the new project. So it's not just going to be simply one funding source that we're using. It's going to require a number of strategies. So one idea would be to use general borrowing, layering in new debt as the outstanding debt on current city facilities is paid off. Another idea is to use general borrowing and structure additional debt service to align with the closure of TIF District 3 in 2030 to reduce the tax rate impact. We had the idea that we could actually use TIF 3 financing for the portions of the project that support private development. So if we have public parking underground, but it helps to facilitate private development, or is open to the public, then that might be eligible for TIF 3 funding. We also plan to implement a library impact fee that can help to fund the portion of the new library facility that is built to accommodate future community growth. So we have had impact fees in place for this building. They're actually now fully repaid. But we also have impact fees currently for fire and EMS that are helping to repay the debt on both of those new stations. And then we also thought that there might be opportunities for private fundraising, specifically the library, the senior center, and if we were to build a community center or an intergenerational center, those might be aspects that members of the public might get excited about contributing to. And then we also thought we might be eligible for some grant funding. Kathy wants to outline some options that also we can add to this slide that might be available to us. So the decision points in the community campus plan process that have been made, the tasks that have been completed, are the Common Council recommended an enhanced public engagement strategy and approved sustainability goals for the project. That happened at the last in-person meeting of the council in early 2020 before the pandemic. And the tasks that are remaining, we need to complete the public engagement strategy. We need to get some approved space needs, and then we need to develop a recommended design, and develop recommended cost estimates and funding. So those are some pretty big steps remaining for the project. Still, at this point, only the items on the left have been determined. So when we got our community campus committee group back together, and they were able to meet with Brian Gatto, our new administrator, we brainstormed some ideas, and one of the things that Brian in particular noted is that we did not have enough in the initial contract related to rehabbing existing facilities. So that's a baseline that we need for being able to compare any new construction option. We need to know from the baseline how much would it cost to just retrofit and rehab. And then the other part of the project that had changed a lot is we needed some additional study related to the project delay, as well as how the pandemic might affect space needs. Because the office market, the office environment has changed completely. It maybe hasn't been a total overhaul for our local government entities like it has for the private sector. But we do have some employees now who are working remotely. We also have the added factor of most of our meetings, like, you know, when Kelly meets with Kathy Kuntz, for example, when we're meeting with people outside of the community, almost all of those meetings are happening on Zoom now, which is great because we're not having to commute, but it makes it really hard for people who have cubicles and don't have like a private space to be able to hear and focus on their meetings. So the amendment that was brought forward to our community campus committee focused on these two items. Rehab and maintaining existing facilities and further study related to the pandemic. And the community campus committee reviewed that amendment, but they did not recommend proceeding with it because there were a lot of outstanding questions still around the amendment and whether it actually covered everything that the community needed, the committee and the common council would need in order to make an informed decision. So from that meeting, I kind of honed in on 3 items that I think were really inhibiting being able to continue to move the project forward. There were several other items that were brought up during that meeting that were concerns about the planning process and some changes that we needed to make given that we had taken that 2-year break. So the first concern is that there really isn't much differentiation of the 3 concepts that were presented. So you saw that they all had a range of costs, they all had a range of square footage needs, and they're all new construction. So that doesn't really give us much of a choice in the matter. Like, they're all so similar that in fact, we found out that we wouldn't even be able to do that enhanced public engagement strategy that we had originally outlined, because to the public, those 3 concepts didn't have enough differentiation between them to really make a difference one way or another in some of the health and equity impacts that we were looking at. The second was we really wanted an itemized list of what an MEP analysis would include. So an MEP analysis is a mechanical, electrical, and plumbing analysis looking at our current facilities, and specifically, we wanted to expand that analysis to determine whether rehabbing current facilities could be achieved or could still enable us to achieve the city's approved sustainability goals for the project. And then talking with our IT director, when I mentioned that we were looking at the possibility of having existing facilities, he really wanted to be sure that that would include any additional costs related to IT needs. We're here today because they're retrofitting a facility now for hybrid technology that wasn't really set up for that or intended for that. And so there may be some additional costs associated with IT needs, and we wanted the consultants to study that. And then the third thing, and I think this was really the wild card in the meeting, is that the former Parks and Recreation director had put forward a budget item in the city budget to do a space needs analysis, a detailed space needs study for a community center. And it was proposed to be paid for with park development funds, and it was included in the budget for $30,000. our community campus committee was concerned that the results of that study were needed before we could decide what we wanted to do with our downtown spaces. Is the community center going in this building or is it going somewhere else? How much space do we need from this study and how do we incorporate that into this project without knowing the details and the results of that study? So we got together with our staff team and working with our new Parks and Recreation Director, Kylie, we actually found out that the funding source that we had identified for the community center space needs study probably isn't an eligible use of park development funds, especially if the study is not going to recommend that the community center be located within a park. If it decides that it makes sense for us to build the community center downtown, then that probably wouldn't be an eligible use of those funds. And then furthermore, we heard from Tammy that she had been working previously with our former city administrator and really wanted to get a little bit more detail around the senior center space needs. And then the library, at the time that we did the RFP, which was 2019, the library space needs study at that point was only 3 years old. So it was pretty well in date, but at this point now it's a 6-year-old study. And so we sat down with Jocelyn and we went over it, and that study needs to be updated. One example is, the population projections that were used by the consultants in that study were DOA projections that are historically very low. And they projected a 2040 population of 22,200 people, and we've already basically surpassed that. So on January 1st, our population was over 23,000, and that's January 1st of last year. So we really need, so now we're struggling because we need 3 studies basically, and we got together with the staff team and we jointly think that the best option for the city would be to work with the consultants that we already have under contract for the community campus plan, but to do a detailed space needs analysis for all of the entities. That way they're working from the same baseline information, the same population projections. And that way, with it being done by the same firm, we think that it would be more comparable amongst the different program types. So we are going to be taking a recommendation forward to the community campus committee. We haven't had them review this yet. You guys are seeing it before they are. To expand the scope of work for the community campus plan to include a detailed space needs study for each city program, to do the full investigation of rehabbing existing facilities, which was included in that amendment that they had previously proposed. And then also we would really like for them to give us some differentiated options, at least one that's all new construction, at least one that could be a hybrid that might include some new construction and some rehabilitation, and then maybe one option that's strictly rehabilitation to see like what the cost differences are. And we might, with more options on the table, we might have some things that we can pick and choose that we like from each. And then also to do the further study related to the pyramid. So what we're looking for from the committee of the whole is any additional feedback that you have on the expanded scope of work that was included in your packet. And one item that I just kind of had on the list because it was mentioned at the last city council meeting is polling location. And whether that maybe should also be a component is that there's one large open space that can be used for a future polling location. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Alderman Ramsey.
And we have a question as with the community center. In the 180,000 square foot original, 150 to 180,000 square feet, nowhere in that is a community center, right?
Not strictly a community center space, but the consultants did propose an intergenerational center, which was not well received by some committees of the city. But what they were proposing is a shared space. So they wanted the senior center to have a separate designated area, and then they wanted what they called an intergenerational center that would function to serve both the senior center programming needs as well as programming needs for all ages. It was pretty small, but it was included. And they did not really do a deep dive into the space needs for that community center component, which is one of the areas where we really think it's lacking.
Do you remember how many square feet they proposed for that?
I always hesitant to quote a number. I think it was 19,000.
Thank you.
So, Abby, great job. I think it is good to have a, new start and, so look at that, what are the buildings, yeah, especially community center is very important, and I think I talked to Matt too before Kylie came, so I think, and I know there was an intergenerational center, but that's not a community center in any case. So I think, looking at that, combining, number one, rehabilitating the building versus the new ones, the cost, how much they're gonna cost, that's a very good approach. And also looking at the space, some of these spaces which were projected were just plain wild. So what are really our needs, I would say even 20, 25, 30 years from now, but realistic needs. So I think it's a good start, and I think the option that we have proposed look good. So not just everything new, but again, we have to look at the senior center. You can see all the commission on everything here. Do we really need to do anything there? If they're happy there and they want to rehabilitate that building, well, that should be just fine. And the same way, we had one of the best library in the state, 2007. It still gets ranked very high, and we need to. What is that which we could add there? Of course, we know the city hall is pretty old, maybe need something there, but yeah, I think I like your approach. Let's have a fresh look at this proposal. And let's talk to our seniors, pretty important.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing all of these and bringing us back to where it was, and thank you for leading on the topic. I love the energy that's put into the project and so many things of wanting to be built. And the one thing I try to piece in my mind is, do we have room for everything in that space? And I think we talked maybe before the pandemic about that, because you were saying maybe there's some room in my district for one of those pieces. And I honestly don't see it. I think you were very kind just to ask. You probably asked everybody. I just don't see it because there's just not a lot of room in my district. My district's already built up. So I'm on the the aging commission and with the senior center. And one of the things that we talk about is there enough room? Can we rehab? And I love that you're talking about the seniors and acknowledging them coming today. Because they would love to have the library. That's one of the ideas. But the library may not really go. We don't know. So, because it's also wonderful facilities. But if that's an option, and we can swap out, that's a great way to reuse it, but give them some more room and some parking. And the other thing we did is we went on a field trip to see the Wanakee Senior Center. And the neat thing that I learned there, and this is for the folks who didn't get to go, because I think you were there, that they decided to move their senior center to sort of the edge of Wanakee at the time. And that way they could build the structure to the way that they needed, with the facilities they needed. And then they could build a parking lot for seniors. Because right now, even when I go to the library with the kids are bumping into the car next to them. The spacing is built, 30 years ago. So my big car doesn't always fit. But the neat thing that we saw in Wanakee, besides the shared space with the community center, and I'm looking at Tammy, that's the community center, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But they have separate entrances. Is that the market, if I understand, it's not in a TIF district. So they built it in a place where there was space and some green space off to the view. And then the developers came in and said, the space behind it is empty. They bought the land, not with tip money and please come build something and seniors need it, but because it was anchored by the senior center. And suddenly, people were moving to those senior apartments because they could walk when it's January and it's -5 or 20. And they could walk and have coffee every morning. And I thought, this is so wonderful because it wasn't one developer who tried to do everything. It was like 2 or 3 different developers and the market brought it forward. Because so often we're trying to help everyone get to where our vision is. The vision came with it. And so I thought, so often we do lead with sustainability and things. And sometimes we can see those other great things. So I would love for that opportunity to be considered. But I do love the idea of the community campus being reviewed and the library as well, just because things are changing.
I just have a general question, but in statement, I really like those ideas. It's really great. When we think about footprint, I know that part of our goal is to shrink our footprint. And while some folks don't necessarily want hybrid use space, I think that there are opportunities to use certain spaces for different things, not that we would want people piling on top of each other, but a perfect use of a community center would be the pooling. I think it would be a really nice way to not have it just be huge expanse. And I know you're keeping that in mind. Thanks, great.
And I have several questions. Could you first go back to the funding slide? But doesn't look here. Has the committee had any discussion about continuing with the public-private?
Yeah, they did make a change to, so I shared the changes that they had made to the primary goals for the project, and there were 13, I think, additional goals that were included in the original scope of work. And one of the changes that they recommended at their last meeting is that we not focus on public-private partnerships for municipal buildings. Overall, I think we're still open to the idea of consolidating and making the city spaces have a smaller footprint that could enable us to sell land for private development. But they really want to steer away from the idea of having private development within the public buildings. And I think there's a real good borrowing reason for that. Bill, if you want to explain that.
Yeah, if you're using tax exempt financing, which we normally use for city projects, there are limitations on what percentage of proceeds can be used for private benefit. So if you have a significant private component, it may prohibit the use of tax exempt financing for this.
So it's just a balance of whatever the private public would be in that situation.
Yeah.
But that's something that the committee has basically made the decision they're not comfortable with.
They really want to steer away from the original idea, which was like, well, could we build a 2-story library with apartments above? Because who doesn't want to live right above the library? Like, that would be really desirable. I think that there are still definitely opportunities for a small scale commercial component, like a small coffee shop on the first floor of the library that could be private space. Maybe something like that would work. But it doesn't mean that overall the project wouldn't be public-private, because, many of these concepts that we're floating so far would vacate a substantial amount of land. So what happens on those properties, we don't know, but the city could have a lot of control over that if we were to do like a competitive RFP process for sites.
Yeah, I gotta say, it can be done about bringing in that public-private component, raises some more challenging questions about how you structure that deal, so whether you have to come to lots or put people in, so that the developer is responsible for all maintenance, or if that doesn't happen, because the city becomes a landlord of the building, and now we have to deal with maintenance of space we don't functionally use, so. Okay, that's it, that could end up being an outcome, but it's another consideration that we discussed.
The only other way to do that would be to make it a private building with a lease back from the city or whatever. Be the only real functional way of doing it.
Do they do that?
Yeah, I don't know, that would be something.
Yeah, it's bigger than that.
It's a good question. Yeah, it would be interesting to see that, because that's the Sequoia Commons is that.
The whole city centers.
Sure.
City building.
I mean, honestly, that's satellite of bigger libraries, obviously, so it's not, it's just the one city library, so it's something to consider, but. The other question I had is, with the three concepts that were put forward, or two questions about the contract specifically, the number of hours that are left, and do you anticipate them being able to meet all 4 studies that are going to be there, so it'll be an extension of that contract?
It'll be more money.
Yeah.
Certainly.
And I'm just interested in why they came back with 3 ideas that were so similar. Having done any sort of, when you're remodeling or doing any sort of project, you don't usually tend to give reiterations of the same idea. I don't know if they were working within some parameters or the fact because it was the designer and builder that were thinking new development would be much more preferable for them instead of doing a rehab, because I know that's probably the preference. But I'm wondering what guidelines were given to them to begin with, if they were just given free rein, or if there was a reason that these 3.
There were no specific guidelines about rehab and, differentiation of concepts. That was not included. I do think that, generally when you're working with an architecture firm and you're talking about building design,
They don't want to recreate what's already there. They
Right.
They can't.
well, and they had also, they had heard the direction from the city that said we want to better utilize the land that we have. And we kind of, we really talked to them a lot about how we liked how the Middleton Center project had turned out and how land was becoming really valuable in downtown. Having these 1-story buildings doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And then they also toured all of the buildings and they spoke with the employees and the user groups, and they heard a lot of complaints about the layout and things like that. So I think that that's really what drove them to the idea of
Starting.
only looking at new construction. We have since heard, and I think maybe one of the concepts could include this, would be having the senior center move into the library space. That I think that would solve a couple of problems that we have. One being that a lot of people really like the library building. And 2, it could be less costly to retrofit that building for the senior center needs than to build new. It does pose some problems for parking, and if we're gonna use that, then that kind of pushes any new construction to happen on the current library parking lot space, which could be challenging, especially given that, we have the 1-story Hubbard Avenue diner that also uses that parking, even though it's not, it's not under an agreement, but a lot of people use that space or that parking lot to access Hubbard. And then also just meeting the different parking needs for different user groups. Not everybody wants to park on it. So.
Yes, thank you. So Abby, did the $30,000 community center space needs analysis get done?
No,
Okay.
no, we never sent that out as an RFP or
Okay, so then thinking about, you also mentioned that the Community Campus Plan Committee will be asked to approve the space needs analysis for each city program. What does that mean? Does that include only the ones we've heard talked about today, or would that include the community center, the youth center, and any other?
It would include the community center. I don't think we've ever talked about the youth center just because they are at Comrie now and they, I think that they have a pretty decent space. Is that right, Kylie? Or no? Okay.
They don't have.
I'll defer to Kylie.
Yeah, they don't have dedicated space, they have to vacate it.
Would that be part of the community center at all? That was the center?
I think it, if we're looking at all recreational programming, it should be included as recommendation in some aspect, but I don't. I think that there's a lot of different components when you come to the youth center with transportation and it being on site. There's a lot of positives there. It's just not having dedicated space or like storage and that's just something that I know Gabriella would love to see, is just having an office on site at the school district. It would help the youth center, we benefit greatly with her presence in the, over at that, wherever she's at in the school district. But without it having dedicated space, there comes a lot of crossover with that classroom being used for other instruction and they move and yeah. But we use the 2 gyms too, and then the hallway space actually, for we don't just use the classroom, so. Wherever.
Yes.
Follow-up, yeah, well, it's a different.
So, what I just add to that one there, the youth center, so, at one time it was at City Hall and it did not work. So when it really worked and bloomed was when we went to the Clark Middleton. So it's very important that the kids, it should be close to where the kids are. So I think, having a Clark Middle School, we may need to work with them. And I'd be happy to do whatever we need to do, but it probably is best where it is. So.
Yeah, then you mentioned that 50% of the amendments of the contract is going to be to look at additional costs related to further consideration of rehabbing and maintaining existing facilities. Will that work include trying to factor in the IRA funding that we heard about to see how that could impact our costs?
It absolutely should, yes.
Yeah, it's sustainability goals. Excuse me. And looking at rehab and existing facilities, if that was an option here to sustainability issues that keep absolutely. Otherwise, it makes no sense for us to keep those buildings we're investing into long term. We also, as part of that, want to know what would be useful life those buildings are for rehab. Well, they're 1960s era construction, so even if you have it, you'll be able to get 20 years old, years out of it, so we want to understand that.
The year was the library built? What year is the library built?
90.
City halls.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
I thought, Alderman, did you have another question or? Yeah, Alderman.
Generally speaking, we spend a lot of money on studies and plans and get frustrated after a while because it seems like we spend so much money on that. But in this particular case, I would advocate that we go back to the consultant and get some of these questions answered. Because we really need to narrow down exactly what it is that we need. As I listened to all the various different things that are on the wish list, not to scare you, but by the time you're done, you're well over $100 million. I mean, we're going to be close to that now. And you throw in a community center. I mean, we're not talking pocket change. We're talking a lot of money. So in my estimation, I think we would be better off to really try to drill down what we think we absolutely need to have. It's frankly spending that kind of dough makes me a little queasy.
And if I could just add a comment, I agree with Alden. So actually the first proposal which they came up was already well over $100 million. So then we had a conversation with them. This is what they came up with later. And that's already close to $100 million now. So.
Okay.
Thank you. I agree, and I don't want to go to referendum again anytime soon. We'll have to for other things, but so keeping it on the needs versus wants, I'm cool with that. I want to move forward and help those. My first thought was about Katie's point about the footprint shrinking. I remember that from the pre-pandemic, and that was the goal. So me throwing out this other senior center probably threw you off, so I apologize.
No, I do think it was, no, I love all these ideas.
All right, and so my question on that, Abby, is do we know what kind of height limit there is in downtown? Not like zoned for, but I know that land is a little bit tougher to build on, going down and then going up, because that increases cost, because that land, if I remember correctly, is more marshy, like my Lakeview Park area. Just for others who are newer, we wanted to go up on the Lakeview Park structure, and actually do like a second floor oversee, so that people could actually see Lakeview, like view, right? It was a very aggressive and wonderful idea, but it turns out because of the marshy land, you can't go up. And we're lucky that it's as stable as it is because of what they did in the 70s. So is it kind of 3 to 4 stories is our max?
Well, I know in the Middleton Center project that, you know, they are pumping water 24/7 to have the underground parking that they have in place. So it's not inexpensive to build underground parking in downtown. I don't think we have detailed soil studies or something from these sites. So I would assume that they're very similar to what we have at Rockaway. But, I mean, they have, you know, 5-story buildings within the Middleton Center.
So that's probably what we're looking at for size or for height. Okay. My second thought is with Dan's comment about the wants versus needs. I've been thinking about the senior center for a while, being on their committee. And one of the things that I'm trying to weave in is that need for workforce housing, affordable housing, senior housing in the city and the county. And what I find is that a lot of people want to stay in their community, in their block, in their neighborhood, because they love Middleton. And there's just not a lot of senior housing to be had. So that is one of the reasons I support moving it, if we can mimic Wanakee and have that senior housing open, because if 150 apartments were created by the market, then that might be people who are moving out of their house that they are now empty nesters, and they've been living amongst their community. So those houses would open up naturally. So that is one of the things I'm thinking about, because that return on investment isn't immediate. Like, we don't get $1 back for building it. And yet, if we don't have to build 12 new houses and lose trees in the ongoing process, I feel like we're a little ahead on that. So as other things are looked at, I'm open-minded. Thank you for your time.
And I do think, to Alder Kuhn's point, one of the ideas that was brought forward by the Workforce Housing Committee, looking at affordable owner-occupied housing opportunities, was, you know, if we are freeing up land in the downtown, how do we use that? And is there an opportunity for a community land trust or some other innovative housing model, maybe geared specifically towards seniors, or could be for all ages too, but something that would provide an owner-occupied option. I know the City Hall site has been discussed as a good option for that, because if we were to build a taller building, let's say on the library parking lot site, that would provide a little bit of a buffer. So in the comprehensive plan, we talk about missing middle housing, and it's missing middle in terms of income level, but it's also missing middle in terms of the density and scale of the unit. So we have small single-family homes surrounding the City Hall site, and if we were to go with like a townhome option, a community land trust or something like that, that would be a really nice way to kind of provide that scale.
That'd be cool.
Yeah, I just we do have to be conscious about when we get towards the residential, that they're being, those are the oldest homes in we want to make sure that that's recognized. I just wanted to say, I like the idea, if, you move senior center to the library, then you can have the opportunity to do some staging. Because if you're trying to build new and you take the building down and you don't have a home for the city hall until something else is being constructed. So I do like that. One question I wanted to know is if we were to ask the consultants to do space needs again for a community center, which a strictly community center, and library, where are we looking at? Will they consider, what would it look like to have a library satellite branch? Are they only gonna look at the downtown and what it would mean? I want to make sure that they're evaluating for the best location for a community center. Is it the best idea to keep all the library functions in downtown, or is it better just to split them? I know everybody has different opinions and ideas on that, so.
That was included in the feasibility study in 2015.
But we do need to be able to make sure they're not just gonna focus on this, what's it look like in the city? And that's a separate study for that community center. And I'm not quite sure if the current consultant
needs to be the one looking at the community center or not? Because as when it was first proposed, that wasn't, I think, the plan, but I want to make sure that all Middleton is considered when we talk about.
Yes, so, to your question, the current expanded scope that we have put together does not include a consideration of looking at a branch library. It only is looking at having the library downtown. The only locational aspect or consideration is related to the community center itself. We did want them to study and look at whether the downtown is the best location for that, or whether we should use like census data. Where do the most people who are transit dependent live? Where do the most people who live in multifamily housing that maybe don't have access to a yard? Where are our lower income families living that might benefit from having a community center nearby? So those location aspects are only tied to the community center. And then there's also some enhanced engagement that we've discussed with the consultants around asking the community what they want to see in the community center, because we don't have one now. So we don't really know what exactly it is that the community wants and what we're missing. And so we kind of beefed up that component of the project in this expanded scope, and as we've discussed it with the consultants, but we didn't include that for the library.
We need to get some answers to these questions. We just gotta, want to get the answers.
Well, and I'm just sitting here thinking about how all these pieces are so interrelated. If you think about the library program they have for the youth, is that something that can be done at a youth center? Is that something that has to stay under a library umbrella? And the thought that this 2015 study on the feasibility of the library, to me, the pandemic has shifted the entire idea of what a library can do and what their needs are. I mean, you walk into the library now, your magazines they don't have a room for the magazines anymore. Things have changed so much even within the last 3 years, but even, by the time all of this is coming, that study is gonna be 10 years old, and things I think have changed so much. I don't wanna go down the rabbit hole of it, but I wanna make sure that we're using city resources to the best and we don't get siloed into thinking, this is the library that they have. And I understand that, and I admittedly, the library funding is something that's different, and I know that there's a different statute that surrounds it, but I just don't wanna make sure that we get so siloed and thinking this is the community center and it falls under parks, and here's the library and it falls under library, that if we're talking about these facilities, that we're thinking of a little bit more.
And it's interesting because like if it's a parks program, you can charge for it, if the libraries you don't, and that's, and to keep those isolated and easy to differentiate is important.
And I recognize that, so I understand that there's a rabbit hole that's here, but I also don't wanna, when we're talking about spending $100 million on facilities, I don't wanna be making duplicates of everything, right, when we can, so.
If we ask them to amend their scope of work, do you have a best guess as to how long this process would take?
Well, what we were planning to do is to ask them to complete the MEP analysis portion before the city's budget process. Because that would tell us, if there were consideration of maintaining and keeping one of the current buildings, we would at least have some cost estimates for what that could include, and it also might help us with any funding opportunities through IRA or the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I don't have a timeline for the rest of it because I have not given them this expanded scope of work, because they're gonna spend a lot of time responding to this and putting together all their costs. And I wanted to make sure that we were on the same page, and also that the community campus committee is on the same page before we even reach out to them. They've been very good to work with in terms of, prioritizing our project when we're ready, letting us put it on hold. So I'm hoping that it won't drag out. What I would really like to see is for the strategic plan. I know we're gonna talk about it later on the agenda. If there are five or so items that the council decides to prioritize, I think that this should be one of them. Because we have been working on this since 2019. Granted, we put it on hold, but I really think that we need to ramp it up and get a really good direction and make sure that this expanded scope has all of the information that we need to make a really good decision for the city.
Did we fund that through TIP?
It was partially TIF and partially general fund.
Thanks.
Yeah, so again, as I said earlier, great thing. So let's, and like the other elders have said, let's make a differentiate between needs and wants. And this is a great opportunity. Let's look at the whole city. Just because these buildings are here in downtown now, that's where they need to be. And then let's look at, again, 15, 20, 25 years from now. It would be hard to. And also let's look at what the artificial intelligence, machine learning is doing. I mean, the whole landscape is changing. So I think, like Kathy said, do we need a library, branch library somewhere else? We have to look at the needs of the whole city. And I think, and I'm sure you will.
Nelson. Another big domino effect that could happen here is that you decide to make everything on one campus, then the opportunity opens up that you get some public transportation that would bring everyone from all corners of the city to this place. And Alder Ramsey and I have talked over time about those fabulous trolley buses. And wouldn't it be amazing if we bought some and really had them going all the time for people? And then you could have a central space and make it the opportunity equal by having that opportunity for transportation.
In our city transportation, so wonderful.
Amazing, right? I was just in New Orleans and they have the streetcars in New Orleans and they're $1.20 ride all day long. And wouldn't it be great if it was zero?
I just want to point out, Abby, the website that you have put together for this, it's comprehensive. It has all the documents there. It's easy to find, easy to follow where we've been, why we had to change courses, when we changed courses, who to reach out to with questions. It's very well done. And we know now, thank you for the presentation, because we know now there's a lot of work to do. There are no set plans. We have to further study this before anything can be planned. I like that this is following the presentation from Kathy Coons, because we have a 10-year window here that could really maximize the efficiency of these buildings and really move us forward. There is one thing that I did get a call from somebody. There's some misinformation out there about the plan. They said, what's with the 5 buildings and five municipal buildings in 5 years? I was like, being on the committee, like, I don't understand, but there is a document that's being circulated that says, in the next 5 years, the city is planning to build a community campus in downtown Middleton with 5 municipal buildings. We have this website. People should look at it. It's very important. Correcting this information is difficult. And this project is challenging enough. So thank you.
Abby, are you going to need, is this direction from the committee today what you need, or do you need to go to council then?
I'm gonna take this information, compile it, and put it into the packet for the community campus committee so that they can see the discussion that you all had. For the members, actually, a few of the members are here, but for those who aren't, they can see the discussion that you had here. And then, once they approve the idea of the expanded scope, I will get a cost estimate from our consultants, and I will bring that to finance and council for consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, our next topic is going to be on TIP, and I just want to ask Bill, it's 1:40. I don't know how long your presentation is going to be. I'd like to work in a few minutes break at a halfway through point, if we could have 2. Do you think this will be enough time, or do you think we'll go more than 25 minutes?
I was thinking somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes, depending on questions.
Good. But maybe after that, we'll take a short break.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bill Burns. I'm the city's finance director. I'm going to give an update on tax increment financing. This is one of the main economic development and a key budgetary tool for the city. So update on TIF starting in general and then going into some specifics about TIF at Middleton. Summary of where the TIFs are financially, and then some of the questions that are coming out for the city to consider over the next year. So my outline, start with that, the basics, TIF 101, how TIF is being used in Middleton, I'll do the financial summaries, and then get into those future points. So just starting with a little bit of a TIF 101 and some basics and defining the terms. We talk about TIF, that stands for tax increment financing, and that is the financing concept, the financing tool of the tax increment financing. I also refer to TID, T-I-D, that refers to the tax increment district, and that is the specific geographic area. And in Middleton, we have two TIDs, TID 3 and TID 5, and those are separate areas of the city where we have tax increment financing available. The way TIF works, when a TIF district or a TID is created, you draw that geographic boundary and you look at the value of all the taxable property within that area. That becomes the base value. And that value is available for all of the different taxing jurisdictions, which includes the city, school districts, county, and technical college, and they continue to receive taxes based on that base value. But then any increase in value above that base is captured and stays within the TIF district to pay for costs that are incurred by that district to incur new development. And then when the TIF district closes, all of that tax base, the base plus all of the increase in value, is available for all of the tax jurisdictions. And TIF is one of the primary economic development tools, and certainly the most powerful economic development tool in Wisconsin. We don't have a lot of tools that are available in some other states, so that's why TIF districts end up being so important both for Middleton and for other municipalities in the state. I like this slide. I usually include this each year. This is a graphical demonstration of what I was just talking through, and this comes from the state's Department of Tax Increment Financing Manual. What this is trying to show is that when you create that TIF district, you have that base value that goes to the county, school, to college, municipality. The big green triangle here represents that over time, that value within the district grows. And then when you get to the red line on this chart, when the TIF is terminated, then you have this larger tax base available for all tax jurisdictions. So everyone benefits from the additional tax base in the state as well as all the other jurisdictions. There are requirements in state statutes for creating TIF districts. It requires action of the city. It also requires action of a body called the Joint Review Board. And the Joint Review Board has representation from each of those tax jurisdictions, as well as a citizen member. They have to approve the creation of the TIF district, and they also approve a project plan. That project plan includes the map defining the area, what types of expenditures are eligible for that TIF district, and it also identifies the total level of spending that's authorized. There's also a really important limit, which is a major constraint on creating TIF districts, and that's the 12% test, which is written in state law. And under that rule, you cannot create a new TIF district or add net territory to a TIF district if you already have TIFs that cover 12% or more of the value within the municipality. So when we look at City of Middleton for 2022, the most recent year available, 15.6% of the taxable value in Middleton is within our two TIF districts. We're over that 12% limit, and therefore we are not currently able to create a new TIF district or to add territory to one of our current TIF districts. And I put this chart in here on the right to show historically that we have been over that limit for many years. That is an indicator of the strength of our TIF districts, the amount of development that's been created. We have some very successful TIF districts, but that has put us in the position where we've been over that limit. And looking from 2015 to 2016, even when we did a subtraction of territory, we've done several subtractions to take areas out of the TIF district that no longer need that incentive, we still did not get below that 12% test. There are different types of TIFs. I'm not going to go into the details of all of them, but those are all set by state statute. It determines how many years the TIF district can be open and how many years we have available to spend within the TIF districts, and then there's different requirements for what types of property. And one other important concept for TIF districts is what's called the but-for test. And there's a couple different versions of this. One is looking at the TIF district as a whole. That something that joint review board should be looking at when they are creating a new TIF district is, would development occur within this area without the use of TIF? Are the economic benefits greater than the cost? And do those benefits outweigh the value of the tax increase? So the concept is that TIF should only be used to help encourage development or incentivize development where it would not otherwise occur. And so when you're looking at creating a new TIF district, you have to answer these questions. It's also something that we look at on a project by project basis. So once the TIF district's created, we have a development proposal and the developer coming in asking for TIF assistance. We will do an analysis and look at what are the finances of that project, is there a gap, is TIF needed, and then what is the appropriate amount of TIF to help incentivize that development, but it shouldn't be going beyond that amount necessary to help the development. There are certain eligible TIF costs. Those are defined first by state statute. There's limitations in the statute of what TIF can and cannot be used for. That's also governed by the TIF project plan, and in Middleton we have a TIF policy that further defines what we would consider development. Examples are generally things that would be necessary to help encourage development, things like infrastructure, land acquisition, professional services, and capital costs, development incentives. Things that are excluded by state statute are spending on most municipal and school facilities. Like when we were talking about community campus plan, you can't use TIF directly to pay for a city hall or to pay for a library, for example. You can use TIF in some cases for parking. You can use it for projects where there is a private component, things like enhancement to streetscape. So there may be some elements of that project where TIF could help finance, but they can't finance construction in the city building. It can also not be used for general government operating expenses, for projects that don't benefit those properties within the TIF district. And there is a requirement that you cannot use it for cash grants unless there's a development grant. And that has been our practice for a very long time. We have development grants instead of terms of incentives. And then when we look forward to when a TIF district closes, what happens? And there are a couple different benefits, couple different impacts. And we'll get to this more specifically when we look at TIF 3, which is the city's TIF district that is getting closest to being closed. And first is you look at what I have in the column on the left, which I'm calling residual tax income. So if you go through the full life of the TIF district, they've paid all of their costs, paid back all of their debt, and there's a balance left in cash at the end of that TIF district. That is distributed to all of the different taxing jurisdictions based on their share of the tax bill. So the simple example I put here, if we have a TIF district, they have $10 million left after all the obligations get paid. That's split, and the city is currently about 30% of the total tax bill. So the city would get 30% of that, in this case, $3 million. And that is available to be used for any general public purpose. That's not tied to those TIF restrictions. School district would get about half of that, roughly $5 million, and then the remainder would be split between the county and the school district. That's one-time money, so that's just when the TIF closes, that balance is distributed. That's a one-time source of funds that can be used for any project. The other benefit financially when a TIF district closes is there's an adjustment to the municipal property tax levy limits. In Wisconsin, municipalities are limited to growing their property tax levy, the amount they collect, by net new construction. No adjustment for inflation, it's just based on new construction. There is a provision that when a TIF district closes, or when there's a subtraction of territory from the TIF district, that there is also a levy limit adjustment that looks at half of that value removed from the TIF district. So if you have a TIF district that closes, say there is $200 million of tax base available when that TIF district closes, you look at half of that, compare that percentage to the city's overall tax value, you get a percentage adjustment. And as an example here, when the city did its last subtraction from TIF district number 3 in 2020, the city then received a 2.1% levy limit adjustment available for a future budget. So there are those benefits that allow you to grow your levy. And the concept is that there's this additional tax base available. Half of that is essentially required by state statutes to go towards keeping property taxes down, but municipalities can use half of that as an adjustment to increase their operating budget. Looking specifically at how TIF has been used in Middleton, as I mentioned, we have 2 tax increment financing districts. TIF 3 was created back in 1993. It is coming close to the end of its expenditure period, meaning that all new costs need to be incurred by 2025. And then the district is required to close, I realize there's a typo here, it should be by 2030, not 2023. It's always 5 years after the end of the expenditure period. This TIF district did receive a legislative exemption, so normally it would have been required to close by 2020, but many years ago, the city had gone to the state legislature and they extended both the expenditure period and the life of the TIF by an additional 10 years. This is a very successful TIF district, one of the most successful in the state of Wisconsin. Its current value is $572 million. And there are also been 5 subtractions over the life of this TIF district that have already removed $470 million from the TIF district that has gone on to the general available tax base. So in total, it's generated over $1 billion in new value within the district. The city's other TIF district, TIF 5, was created in 2009. That is coming up on the end of its expenditure period in 2031, and it's required to terminate by 2036. Current value increment in that TIF is $175 million. This TIF district started slower. 2009 was around the time of that time, so the first couple of years there wasn't much growth in this TIF district. That has really changed, especially in the last 2 to 3 years. We've had a lot of new projects, that increment is growing, and we're seeing that continue in some of the projects that are on the horizon. And in 2021, we did an amendment TIF district. Because we're over that 12% limit, we couldn't just add territory without doing the subtraction. So we did a simultaneous addition subtraction, took out some areas that either have already redeveloped or that we anticipate are not going to be redeveloped within the life of the TIF district, and used that value that was removed to be able to add some areas to try to pick up a portion of University Avenue, which is an area that previously did not have any TIF district coverage outside of the downtown. So looking at the maps that show current boundaries, this first one is TIF 3. The areas that have the blue highlighting are the active areas within that TIF district. And as you look at that, you see a lot of holes that are the white areas. And those represent areas that have been subtracted from the TIF district. So a lot of the Middleton Business Park on the west side of the belt line has been removed. That's part of those subtractions. And the pieces that are left are still active. There is a requirement that the boundary needs to be contiguous, so that's why we see some kind of strange lines in there. That if we have active projects, they need to be connected by other parcels to be part of that one contiguous district. And then this is our current map for TIF district number 5. This is the Parmenter corridor, extending east through the Greenway and then over to the Allen and Century area.
I understand that the state legislature is taking a look at that contiguous this spring, so that may change.
Yeah, that's one concept that has been suggested for the legislature to look at, to allow subtractions without having that contiguous requirement, which would make it easier to do subtractions. The areas in purple on this map are areas that were added. So you can see in the bottom right of the map that in order to have the current law continue to be contiguous, it stretches along some public property and then picking up a portion of University Avenue that we were able to have. Also picked up some areas west of the belt line that were in TIF 3, have not developed yet, and they were added to TIF 5 to give more time for our development projects, as well as the area of Bell Farm. Each year we provide and update financial models for both TIF districts. For the council members, I do have a hard copy of the model at your place, just so it's easier to view the entire thing. We do have some extra copies if anyone else would like to pick up a copy of those before we today. Those sheets do identify some of the assumptions, the time periods. We try to be somewhat conservative on the assumptions about annual inflation and development. As finance people, we always like to be more conservative. If the numbers come in higher, that's always a good thing. And then with TIF 3, there is one additional territory amendment that would be allowed. That is not factored into the model. So this is just right now looking at current TIF district. There are no additional amendments. It goes to its full life in 2030. And the way this model is laid out, looking at the big sheets, working from left to right, we have different sections across the top as the column headers, and then we're showing, just for reference, the last couple of years, the year that we just completed, highlighted in yellow, and then future years projected going down. So for TIF 3, that shows that in 2025, where the dashed line is, that would be the end of the expenditure period to incur new costs and new projects. And then if the district goes to its full life in 2030, that would be a final year for the TIF district. The major source of revenue is tax increment. Those are those additional taxes paid by property owners based on their additional value for the TIF district. That has been very strong for TIF 3. We're looking at over $10 million in 2022. Because of the subtraction we did, we're projecting that that's going to drop a little bit in 2023, but then as additional development occurs, that will continue to grow a little over $10 million each year since moving forward. Other sources of income include interest income. If we were issuing debt, which right now we don't have any new debt projected for this TIF district. And then other revenue includes different state aids. There are state aids for exempt computers, for exempt personal property, fundraising for the Stormfront Street Plaza was included there. If there's any federal grants that would be included. So in total, in 2022, about $12 million of revenue for the district. And to put that in perspective, that's about half of the city's general fund operating budget. So this really is a huge component of the city's finances. Looking at the next section, this looks at the use of funds. The column labeled project costs would be direct city costs. So this could be capital projects. A large amount of the 2022 item is land acquisition for the Pleasant View Road reconstruction project, as well as in professional services for planning, engineering, legal, and other costs for the district. In 2023, there's a very big number. You see 24.9 million. That is really being driven by a couple of very large projects. Pleasant View Road reconstruction, which is about $14.5 million for construction of its own, as well as reconstruction of Parmenter going north, as well as the downtown street reconstruction project along Parmenter. The next column over, developer payments. These are incentives that are paid to developers based on an agreement. So if we have an agreement with a developer, we've heavily used what's called developer finance TIF, where we don't provide them with funds up front, but they're eligible based on the new tax increment and taxes that they pay, that they can get a portion of that back over time to pay for their development costs. And this column represents those payments going out. And those are scheduled through 2030. That is something that if we have existing projects and existing agreements, we can continue to make those payments through the remaining life of the district. So even after we're at the end of our expenditure period, we continue to pay off those obligations. We also have written into our agreements that we have the ability to prepay those. So if we are in a situation where we have excess funds and we want to pay that obligation off sooner, we have that flexibility. Next column, cost recovery. This is an item that we have included for many years for TIF District 3, making payments to the city's general fund to help pay for general fund costs incurred for property within the TIF district. That at its peak was about $2 million a year. We've been talking about this in the budget process every year for several years, that in 2025, that's the final year that we can make that payment. That needs to be phased out because that is going to be gone in 2026. So the city has been reducing that annually as part of the budget process. In 2023, there's $575,000 budgeted. That's projected to step down the next couple of years and then ends in 2026. Donations to other TIF districts, that is an option under state law that you can have donations from one TIF to another if it's included in your project plan. And our project plan for TIF 3 does have an estimate of a total of about $8.7 million donated from TID 3 to TID 5. That was put in initially planned as a payment from TID 3 to TID 5 to help with the narrator development that was still planned TID 5. No construction has started, we don't have a timeline at this point, so that's something that we will have to revisit. If we will be making those payments and when based on when that development is. So in total, that gives our uses of funds for projects. This on the bottom of the model pulls the upcoming projects from the city's capital improvement plan, so just providing some detail on those items that were included in that project cost list. The other pieces of the model, in the blue headers, we have debt service. So it's very common that when TIF districts are created, they don't have much revenue coming in yet. Cities will issue debt and borrowing to pay for projects that are paid back over tax increment over time. For TID 3, we have no outstanding debt at this point. The final debt service payment was made in 2022. 2023 going forward, we have no additional debt service. And at one point, we were looking at potentially needing to borrow for the Pleasant View Road project. Right now, based on these projections, we're anticipating that we'll be able to cash fund that project, which is just kind of amazing to think about, that we have a almost $20 million project between land and construction that we're able to cash fund because of the strength of the state district. And then in the purple, that is the fund balance. And it looks first on an annual basis. So for 2022, if we were to take those revenues minus the expenses, minus that final debt service payment, the net positive was about 1.3 million. That adds to the cumulative fund balance. So cumulative balance at the end of 2022 was 28.7 million. There's a column showing advances, and advances are essentially loans. TIF District 3, because of its success, has been able to loan funds to other city funds. At one point, there were loans. It was initially a loan to TIF District number 5 for about $2 million. There's also a loan to Pleasant View Golf Course to help the golf course pay off some of its debt early. That golf course has repaid advances to the general fund. We'll be continuing to pay off the advance to the TIF District, and we're showing that TIF 5 will pay off its advances. So those will be fully repaid by the end of 2025. When you take the cumulative fund balance minus those monies that aren't available because they've been loaned to other funds, you get to that final column of available funds. So at the end of 2022, there was $25 million in available funds in TID 3. We're showing that it's projected to drop in 2023 with all of those major capital projects. We're down to about 6.2 million. And then at the end of 2025, based on the planned projects, we're at just about $10 million available in that TID district. And then you can see the projections going out from there when we continue our revenues coming in with no major new costs coming in, that balance would grow each year going through 2030. That brings the question, which I'll get into in a minute, of what do we do looking at TIF 3? And there are some options that we can consider. Do we look at closing early? Do we look at contractions? Do we look at donations to other TIFs or other projects? It's going through TIF 5, similar assumptions here in terms of tax rate and inflation. We have factored in some additional growth for new development. So this model includes the Farm Phase 1 development, $100 million projected over a 5-year period. We have a placeholder for potential development on the Miracle site, although at this point we don't have a specific project or timeline. And because of the amount of time remaining on this TIF district, we have added $50 million for other projects that would come out over the remaining life of the TIF district. One major project that we have not added in at this time to the model is the Bruce Company site, just because there's so many variables in what's going to be done, what the timeline is. Their full scale is very ambitious. There would be a lot of value added, but a lot of that would be built out potentially even after the end of the TIF district expenditure period. And I know that the developers have been interested in looking at other options, and could there be different legislative changes to extend the life of TIF 5. So with all those variables, we just left that out of the model for now. The model is laid out very similar, so I'm not going to go through every column, but just kind of hit some highlights. The first column, the tax increment, that has grown significantly. So we were at 2.3, almost 2.4 million in 2022. You can see over the next few years, that's projected to be up to 4 to 5 million based on the development that either has already been in progress or some of those projects that were proposed when we started construction within the next year or two. Looking at the uses of funds, again, this is laid out similarly. There is an extra column here for city finance incentives. Those would be development incentives where the city pays upfront. It's rare that we do that, but one example is in the Tribeca project. The city is helping the front costs for regional stormwater pond, and then as development occurs, either in Tribeca, that'll be generating revenue to help that pay back the city's investment. This plan looks at the items that were in the capital improvement plan. Biggest item coming up in 2023 is the planned purchase of the latitude graphics site for $2.2 million in 2023. We have a placeholder for the yard infrastructure phase 1 in 2025, and then additional costs for Century Avenue Bridge and the Pheasant Branch 6. Looking at the debt service and fund balance for TIF 5, we have a debt service plan to go out through 2035 in this district for projects that have already been incurred. When we look at the fund balance, we have a negative cumulative fund balance in 2022. Again, that's not unusual, especially as TIF districts are earlier in their life, that often they're incurring costs and taking on debt to build things that can be paid for future improvement. And to provide cash for the district, there is this advance. So as TIF 3 had loaned money, a portion of that was loaned to TIF 5, and that has provided cash for future projects. In 2023, there's a projected additional advance of $2.2 million, which would fund that latitude graphics purchase. Based on the projection, we're anticipating that that $2.2 million advance could be repaid as early as 2024, and by 2026, we fully repay those advances. And then you see the projected balance of TIF 5 increasing, projected right now at $6.7 million at the end of 2031 at the end of its extension period. I will say for this one that that's almost 10 years out. There are a lot of things that can will change both with new development and new costs. So with TIF 3, we're getting close enough to the end that we can reasonably project it. With TIF 5, there are more variables, but I think it still helps to look at for planning purposes each year. So what I'd like to end with is kind of what is next for TIF 3? What can we really focus on over the next year and medium for our budget process? And because of the strength of TIF 3 and because of the timing of getting close to the end of the expenditure period and its life, we do have some options. And these are things that we're anticipating working on through staff with our TIF project management team, and then bringing some concepts for the finance committee and council to consider. So one option would be looking at doing an additional subtraction from TIF 3. By state statute, we have one additional subtraction event available. So we could take a look at doing a subtraction perhaps in 2024 or 2025, identify any properties that have fully repaid their TIF obligations, we no longer need them there, and subtract those out. That would reduce that annual TIF revenue coming in. We would likely keep the district open through 2030, but it would give us that additional levy limit adjustment up front, as well as providing that additional tax base earlier. Another option would be to see if we didn't do a subtraction, could we potentially close the district early? So keep all of the property that's in the TIF in there, look at where is the point where we would generate enough revenue and cash balance in TIF that we can either prepay our obligations or escrow any remaining funds and see if we can close that TIF earlier in 2030. Another option to look at is there is a provision in state law that lets you extend the life of a TIF by one additional year, with that additional year of revenue being available for affordable housing projects. So one strategy we could use, whether or not we do a subtraction, is do we extend the life of TIF 3 from 2030 to 2031, use that additional revenue in that year to pay for housing projects. And then a final consideration, or at least one additional consideration, is given the strength of TIF 3, in conjunction with any of these other options, do we look at potentially doing additional donations from TIF 3 to take TIF 5 potentially taking the success in TIP 3 and allowing us to do other projects, or potentially paying off obligations in TIP 5, paying off debt in TIP 5 faster, and reducing those interest costs. There's a lot of pros and cons to each of those, and these are things we need to look at. One thing that I want to consider is looking at that 12% test is, would there be a way, either through subtraction or from an early closure, to get below that 12%? Because as we look at TID 5, if we keep TID 3 open all the way through 2030, by that time, we may have had so much development in TID 5 that we would still be over that 12%. If we look at Del Farm, Bruce Company, and all of the other projects we have on the horizon. And when TID 3 closes, we may want to have the ability to do a TIP district that would include some of the areas of the downtown, but also extend along the rest of the University Avenue corridor that is not currently in TID 5. So that's one of the considerations. So can we subtract enough to get below that? Or would we be better off to just say that we look at closing the TIP district early and potentially then have the flexibility to create a new TIP district? So, as I said, these are all things that we'll be looking at. This will come back to you. We need to look at the pros and cons, but I think that given the timing here, 2025 is going to come up quickly, so we need to start planning for that now. And if we do want to look at the additional subtraction or potential early closure, look at how that factors into our budget and factors into the levy limit adjustment. So this ties into the campus plans. A lot of these future planning things are all now, there's a lot of information. I was trying to keep us moving along here, but I'd be happy to take some time and answer questions or go back.
Before we have other questions, could you just touch on developer finance tip? I know there's some legislation about that right now and what that means for us.
Yeah. So with private development, you can do things either as what's called city finance or developer finance. If you're doing city finance TIF, that means the TIF district would provide an upfront incentive to the developer. They would have a guarantee that they need to maintain a certain level of value so that as they pay their taxes each year over the life of that project, it's repaying that initial investment from the city. The other concept of developer finance is where you don't provide an upfront incentive. You enter into an agreement that says, based on your eligible costs and your revenues, you're eligible to get X amount of incentive over the life of your project. And that is dependent on you generating the value and paying the taxes. So the way that works in practice, say there's $1 million total incentive available. They pay their taxes, they pay $100,000 in tax increment, they might get 50 or 75% of that back, and we issue a check for $50,000 or $70,000. And that happens each year through the life of the project until that initial amount is paid off. That's the model that the city has primarily used for a couple of reasons. It avoids us having to go out and issue debt and incur costs up front. It really puts the risk on the developer because if they don't create the value, they don't get the incentive. And it helps with our cash flow as well because we're timing our payments after we've gotten the tax revenue. There's been some discussion, I don't think anything's been introduced yet, but there's been some discussion about adding another type of TIF district that would be limited to developer finance TIF that maybe would be excluded from that 12%. That'd be something to watch. I want to see the details of that and how that's structured. But right now, whether it's city finance or developer finance, you're still subject to those requirements for the length of time of the TIF district and subject to that 12%.
I really appreciate you keeping up with this.
One quick one here. So, Bill, I know you got 5 options, so 4 or 5 are TIP 3. So, but the most promising one is, and I like to see the maybe not now or later, but the pros and cons of actually closing it. You remember if it wasn't extended by 10 years, we'd be already closing it like now. So, or what I've done even earlier. So that would be, and that gives an opportunity to, have another 1 or 2 other new TIF districts. So I think that would be very interesting. Look, if you want to answer it now, that's fine.
Yeah, there are pros and cons for each, and then definitely we want to go through that analysis and then move that forward. I think if we do look at closing it early, we need to make sure that we have generated enough revenue, have enough cash to pay all of our remaining obligations, because we do have developer finance TIF agreements that go through 2030. So we would want to make sure that if we're able to close it, say, 2 years early, that we have enough cash to prepay those obligations, or we can ask for the funds needed to pay those. And that's part of the analysis we need to look at. When could we close it and anticipate having enough revenue to pay all those obligations? And then what are the advantages of that versus if we do another large subtraction, we maybe would benefit from that earlier, both from the additional tax base and the levy limit adjustment, but that the district would remain open longer. So that's the way that
Alder Ramsey.
I just have a question on TID 5 on some of the developer assumptions. I don't want to get too far into it, but we've carried American on the books for how many years now? And are we anywhere near having any kind of resolution?
Yeah, so last we talked to them, so the mayor's site in Middleton is one of the number of sites that is in their larger, call it their city campus plan. And as of last fall, ours was probably fourth in line with probably 5 projects that they were looking at doing. So at earliest, it would be key. But that date is obviously shifted. I have nothing more on for you than that.
I have a couple of questions. Now, first of all, what's the benefit of donating $8.7 million from TID 3 to TID 5? Why would we just want to hold on to that money or capture it?
I think that was originally put in there specifically tied to the America project, which has been talked about, as we just mentioned, for several years, and earlier in the life of TID 5. TID 5 didn't have the cash to make some of the infrastructure improvements that would be needed for that project. And so that would provide an option, or present a scenario where TID 5 could either issue debt, we could issue debt for TID 5 to pay for that infrastructure, and then we're paying interest at whatever the external borrowing rate is. I think the thought process at the time was, because TID 3 was doing so well financially, that they could make a payment from TID 3 to TID 5 and utilize some of the success from TID 3 to pay for that infrastructure, be it development going in TID 5, and avoid having to do things like that and borrow amounts. Depending on the timing of Meriter, we may want to revisit that, look at what does TID 5 have for resources on its own, if it makes sense to do that donation, or if it would make more sense to do a TID 5. But I think that was the concept. I think the concept of donations in general is it's a way to leverage the success of one TIF district to spur development in a different TIF district that doesn't have as much revenue growth without having to go issue additional.
Okay. And then also, how is cost recovery different from planning administration and other? I see there's a column for cost recovery on the summary for TID 3. But then there's also planning, administration, and other under the cost assumptions for 23 to 25, and it's $340,000 a year.
Yeah, so what's included in the planning, administration, professional services, those would be for expenses for consultants, planning firms like Vanderwall or TIF engineer Strand, legal expenses if they're working with TIF agreements, those kind of costs that are specifically tied to TIF district projects. And the 340 is an estimate that varies each year depending on the level of activity of consultants. When the cost recovery was established, that was to look at kind of a broader concept to say a large portion of the value of Middleton is located in TIF districts. And in order to service the development that has occurred within those TIF districts, there are services required from the general fund, for police service or EMS service, or works, things like that. So the cost recovery was an attempt to take money from the TIF district to reimburse the general fund for those kind of services provided to the district as a whole, rather than things that are tied to specific new projects.
Then two more quick ones. One, do the two TIDs overlap?
They do.
So what happens when we close TID 3? What happens to the property that intersects with TID 5?
Yeah, so when you have one TIF district that's created that overlaps an existing one, you have what's called an overlay. And with the new TIF district being extended to that area, you look at what is the base value at the time the new TIF district is created. That's the base value for purposes of the new TIF. So if there's an initial value here that goes up so much, the increment on that is going to the first TID. Any additional increment is now going to the new TID. So when the first TID is retired or closed, that first portion of the increment is available on federal tax states. It's just that final incremental piece that
And then finally, if we were to close TID early, how would that impact our ability to extend it for a year to get that number?
It wouldn't be able to.
That would, so closing early would eliminate our ability to take a 1 year extension for affordable housing. Or is that? That's part of my question too, is so if we were to extend it 1 year, would that workforce housing have to be within the boundaries of the current TIF 3?
No.
Okay, but if we were to close it out and start a different TIF district, we could do workforce housing in areas we never had the opportunity to do it before. Correct?
Right, yeah, so if you were close it early, get below that 12% and created a new TIF district, you could write in your project plan to have incentives for workforce or affordable housing as part of a new TIF project plan that would be available in your TIF.
So we could target different areas that might benefit from this, from a new TIF area.
Yeah, they would be the boundaries of that new TIF district.
Right. And it just was extended a year. How does that affect payments to the school? Does that defer another year where they wouldn't reap the rewards from a TIF? So that would put the schools 1 year further out in receiving funds too. So that's that way into it. Oh, no.
Thank you, and I liked your questions on the affordable housing, the pros and cons of both. I want to take a moment to focus on TID 3's closing, whether it's 28, 29, 30, 31, whatever that is. Now, a little bit we have to pay off early, if we close early. A little bit we want to fund the new TIF or share with the other, or both. So, I seem to recall that Alder Mark Sullivan was talking around 2028 being the time we might close, maybe 29. And that we would be funding the community campus with those funds. Is that fair? That 40 million?
Return back from the different problems.
So whenever the TIF district closes, you'll have that residual value. So it's 10 million or 20 million, depending on when you close it. The city's share of that, or 30%, is available for any public purpose. It's not tied to those TIF purposes. So
Excellent,
that would be a
not the
possibility.
40, but the portion of that.
Right. So if you close the TID, the city has a portion of that residual balance. Using that for a facility project would be one of the possible uses of those funds.
Okay, so if it was 40 million and you get half, so you're looking at, yeah, okay. You're looking at 15 million. I guess it brings me back to the former topic. How are we paying for these multiple buildings, including wanting a community campus, center, all the things? Because I just remember Alder Sullivan always saying part of this was closing the TIF and having a funding source. Now I understand we can borrow, and I'm not against that. We've paid off, we're close to, or paid off the police, the fire station. We're doing all the right things. That's healthy. That is not a bad thing. But that's quite a differential if we have to get to, well, I think they talked about 40 million, 60, 80 million for that community campus. Pre-pandemic, they kept saying 40 million. And then after the pandemic, it was towards 80. So this isn't much of a ceiling for that. It just makes me very concerned, ever more so, because I thought that this was a little bit bigger for that community campus.
I think that if there's a residual balance from the TID that may be able to help fund a portion of that, and certainly it could be used for any projects. I mean, there's a lot of possible uses that would be one. But at least from the scale of new construction that we're looking at, I don't think that it'd be reasonable to think that the TIF is going to cover the majority of that cost. You know, it's this residual balance from the TIF that combined with a bunch of other financing strategies could potentially be put together for a project.
And I don't think Alder Sullivan thought it would take care of everything back in the day, but, fair point. Thank you.
I got a quick point here.
I think we.
So, Bill, this is the matter. So they were going to build in 2014, now 2024. So we are, why couldn't we ask them, they could borrow the money just like others because they're non-profit, they won't be paying taxes. Otherwise, well, they said you are for finance rather than I'm paying them upfront.
I believe that what has been contemplated would be a taxable property, and that was included in the assumptions. I believe we heard facilities generally have been taxable. They've had some changes with their partnership with UW, and I think that it's been long enough since the original agreement was put together and the timelines that the original agreement were met. So I think that we would need to renegotiate that agreement based on whatever new development also comes.
Yeah, so the best will be they do just that, like everyone else, so. Okay, all right, thank you.
I see that the Pheasant Branch Conservancy Trailhead project is on the list for TIP 5. Yes, so can we use this funding for, because that doesn't seem like it would generate tax income, right?
It's infrastructure, amenities to the assistant district.
Okay, so can we use the funding to do things like acquire land for better stormwater management?
Yeah, stormwater management is eligible item for TIF and the community project.
One comment I wanted to make in touch with Alana is having to work on a university corridor and how setting that up to be a transportation corridor, getting some more density in there, that this would be a good use, I think, if we could find a way to get into the area even further along. So, anything else with that? Thank you, Bill. We're going to do what, 5 or 10?
And just a question, I believe Abby had a couple of updates just on active or future projects related to TIFs.
It's 9 minutes, I think.
Oh,
We can wait until after.
We're safe right now.
Oh, okay. What do you think about 5 minutes, 7 minutes?
No, I think it's something.
To stand up. 2:35, will we reconvene?
Oh, you're right. Oh, that's good. Oh my gosh. Okay.
All right, so he's just gonna really jump on a whole lot of tip projects. Abby's talking.
Okay, folks.
So we don't really have a lot of, recent agreements, but I just wanted to provide a brief update on a few, the status of a few different larger projects that we're working on right now in terms of economic development. So, the first one is the Bell Farm neighborhood, which I think everyone's familiar with. I've included on this slide some of the steps, in a subdivision review process, and the ones with the check marks are the ones that are completed, and then the outstanding items are shown with just an unchecked box. So for Bell Farm, they have had their first phase in their zoning approved, which is the GIP with contingencies. The traffic impact analysis is done for that project. We took the request for an urban service area amendment to the capital area regional planning commission, and that has been approved. That is what enables the subdivision to be serviced with sanitary sewer. And then we also have a preliminary plat to subdivide the land that has been approved with contingencies. And the common council approved the parkland dedication of 3 acres, as well as the fees in lieu of land dedication that will make up the gap between what they're dedicating and what our ordinance requires. The common council has also approved a TIF concept, but we do not have that in an agreement yet. The primary outstanding items are the second phase in the zoning, which has been submitted, the SIP, for the first phase, but it hasn't yet been approved by the council. And then we also need the final plat for the first phase. And then last item on the slide is the city developer agreement, and that outlines the obligations in terms of public infrastructure within the development. This one will also include the TIF component as well. Our attorneys prefer to have that within one agreement. They would like to get started in the spring. There are still some outstanding items shown here, but also there have recently been some, through the DOT's review of the preliminary plat, they have outlined some issues which the developer and the DOT need to work together to solve. And then there's also some known contamination that exists within the development area and had been considered closed and capped by the PNR, but if it is land within the development that will constantly be dug up, for example, if it exists within public right of way where we need to be able to access utilities underground, then that would require some extra remediation work. And so we're working through that. Mostly Sean and his department is working on that with the developer right now. And then another large and complicated project is the Bruce Company redevelopment. For this project, they have received the first phase of their zoning approval with contingencies. We do have a traffic study that's been completed for the project. There is a pretty stark conflict between what the developer would like to see in terms of driveway access points and what the Public Works Committee and also the Plan Commission are recommending. So that's still something that we're working on with the developer and their team. The parkland dedication has been determined by the council. The council is accepting 3 acres of park dedication from that project.
And then they also have their SIP level zoning in place with contingencies, but only for the first phase, which is the Bruce Company office and retail building. We expect that they are going to be requesting TIP assistance. They have provided a lot of information, but they have not yet applied for TIP assistance. So we don't have a TIP application at this point to review. And then we are also waiting on the preliminary plat and the final plat to subdivide land for the project and reconfigure the lot lines. And then also there will be a needed city developer agreement for public infrastructure and likely also for TIF. This project, as well as the Bell Farm development and also the Red Tail Ridge project, which obviously is not a TIF project, so I won't go over it here, have resulted in a lot of staff review over the last few months. And I know he doesn't like his name to be mentioned, but Sean Stowski has done a lot of work to review many submittals that have come in for these projects and resubmittals. So I just want to give him credit for all that work that he's done. And then this project is within the TIF district, TIF number 3, but it is not receiving a TIF incentive and it's not eligible because it's a greenfield multifamily market rate housing project. So that's something that TIF policy, when we put that in place, that was kind of the benchmark for going forward. We're not going to be providing TIF incentives for market rate rental housing unless it's a mixed use building or on a redevelopment site. So this is greenfield, it's not receiving TIF, but it is the Greenway Center project that is being developed by LZ Ventures. And they have their GIP zoning in place with contingencies. We've done the traffic impact study. We are working with them right now on parkland dedication. Specifically, there are 2 triangles of land that we're working on swapping because the city and the developer thought that it was in the best interest of both parties that we trade land. But the land that we are giving to them as our part of the deal has some restrictions, and so it requires us to go through the circuit court in order to release those restrictions. So our attorneys are working on that process right now. And then they do not yet have their, I should not have a check mark by zoning SIP because they don't have that. That should be a box. We are expecting them to submit their SIP on February 7th for review at the February 28th Plan Commission. They will also need a certified survey map to combine the 2 properties because there's a lot line that runs in the middle of one of the new buildings. And again, I mentioned it's not a TIF project, but we are anticipating that this project will result in about $50 million in assessed valuation to TIF number 3. And that's just based on a per unit calculation. We have not had our city assessor look at that number, but we think it's a conservative amount based on the 376 units of housing that they're planning for that site. And then last thing I just wanted to call your attention to is this rendering here is showing the new planned ped bike overpass that will be constructed as part of the Pleasant View Road reconstruction project. And then the last item I wanted to share with you, I'm trying to share this with as many groups as I can so that we can make people aware of this new resource. The city has partnered with the Middleton Chamber of Commerce on an economic development map. And you can find this by going to the city website and clicking on maps, or you can also just access it off the Middleton Chamber page. They have a really nice link on their main webpage. And this will enable you to click on pins from all over the city and find out about different projects that are in different phases of the city's approval process. So the one that I've got in the call out box here is the University Avenue Townhomes project. The type of information that these pins will display include renderings, a short description of the project, the developer for contact information for someone who might be interested in the project, the construction type, as well as the status of the project. And many of these are very conceptual. So right now there are a couple of pinpoints within Greenway, center area that are just projects that don't really have plan drawings yet. They're just, if they've come to a city meeting, then that is now in the public realm, and for transparency, we're including all of those. Daphne Shu from our department maintains this map, and she updates it after every plan commission meeting. So it's up to date as of every 2 weeks. And after a while, you know, what we've learned is that sometimes people come in with a concept and they don't end up constructing the project. So there is a time in which we might pull a project after talking to a developer and learning about their plans. But right now, we're showing everything that has come to the plan commission for consideration. So that was the last project update that I had for you. Thank you.
We have a question about Bruce's.
Yes.
Now, what is the sticking point? I mean, they have been, there were times when it looked like, well, they're ready to, start, and they got all the approvals for phase one, and we thought they were going to start. I know the entrance has been, but it looks like from what I was looking at the public works minutes for the last time, so that seems to be sorted out. So what is holding it back?
Well, if you want to get into the specifics, I'll defer to Sean, but generally speaking, the driveways that they are proposing to access their development are too close to Parmenter Street to meet the city's standards for safety. And they would like to make the case that they have at least one of those driveways in that exact same location, and it's working really well now. But they are also adding 800 units of housing. So they are going through a full rezoning process where the entire site and all the access points are being reconfigured. So a lot is changing, and what the traffic study showed is that the access points that they're proposing wouldn't be safe. They would result in rear end crashes and possibly some visibility issues with drivers that are trying to enter or exit.
So the biggest point is driveway. I think the latest shown was the S driveway. Does that address that issue or not?
They're intending to take a rough concept that they shared with the Public Works Committee last Monday and refine it, draw it, and come up with a couple of iterations of that, different sub-options for the committee to consider further.
Okay, so it's making progress.
That's a good way to describe it.
Okay, thank you, Abby.
Yeah,
Thank you.
If I could add, I think they're still working on the financing as well. They have not completed a TIF application yet, but they have shared various versions of performance with us. And the last performance we received, they were including TIF increment going through 2054, which is about 18 years after the end of the life of TIF 5, which we pointed out multiple times. I think they're interested in looking at, could there be changes, could there be a new TIF district, but that's one of the pieces they're still working on.
Alder Ramsey?
I have a question about one of just a project real quick. These Conservancy Bend townhomes that look to be slated for 2024, and we heard that those are gonna happen.
Oh, you mean the other two buildings?
Yes.
I have not heard recently what their plans are for those, so I don't have an update. Yeah, they've only constructed the one townhome building, I think, that has 9 units along Parmenter. There are 2 additional buildings that are planned, but I have not heard an update on that from T-Wall.
And of course, we remember that the council's choice was for those to be
Owner
occupied.
Yeah.
Which I doubt that they are today.
Those townhomes are all still owned by T-Wall.
So moving forward, when he comes forward to put in the next 2, that'll have to be a conversation.
I just had a question. I know you don't have a crystal ball or anything, but out of all the ones that you have listed here for TID 5, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3. You said Bell Farms doesn't have a signed TID agreement yet? Is that
They
correct?
have an approved concept, but no agreement yet.
Okay. So Bell Farms, Meritor, and Bruce, that's 3 of the 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, which we've just found out, another, so 4 out of, so almost half of these don't have current TIF agreements, is that correct? So 3810 Parmenter, phases 1 and 2, Trotta, and 6100 Lake Street are the 4 that do.
Yeah, I want to look at your list here.
And I realize that this says assumptions on this, so.
Yes, yeah,
I'm saying that now.
so. Yeah, the ones that don't have agreements that are signed yet include Bell Farms, but they do have their concept approved, which I can't think of any instances where the council approved the concept and then didn't approve the agreement as a follow-up, but the reason for the delay of this TIF agreement coming forward is because we are incorporating it into the city developer agreement. So it's a little, we have to wait for all the information with the city developer agreement before we get the TIF agreement signed. And then Meritor phases 1 and 2 does have a signed agreement, but like Bill mentioned, it is outdated at this point. It will have to be completely renegotiated. And then the Bruce Company project doesn't even have, we don't even have an application.
But what about Conservancy Bend? You said that, so that has been approved, they just haven't started construction.
That has been approved. The TIF agreement is approved and signed.
Okay.
That TIF provides 100% of the tax increment for that project because that was one where the city bought land and we did an RFP process and selected this developer who was willing to pay the city for the full cost of the land that we had acquired. And so that was all part of the negotiation with T-Wall for that project. The apartments are constructed, there are 84 units of apartments, and then there's a plan for 19 townhomes that would be owner occupied, but only 9, I think 8 or 9 have been constructed.
Abby, is that closer to the trail from the apartments?
Yes, if you can picture the site, the 3 townhome buildings will kind of form like an upside down U shape with the northernmost building being parallel to the creek corridor, essentially.
So the other 4, so the phase 1 and phase 2, the 3810 Parmenter, Trotta, and 6100 are all
Those are all signed and completed.
completed, okay.
Yeah, the recent change with the Trotta is that property will
That's right.
be going taxes.
That's right, okay. All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we're almost 3 o'clock, we have 3 more agenda items, so make sure we tell that. Next one, we have discussion of in-person versus hybrid meeting criteria for city committees.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I put this on the agenda, again, because it's been an item that the council's talked about over the course of the last couple of months, knowing that our hybrid technology would be forthcoming, and as we've talked about, is being installed as we speak. But we have not gotten kind of a decision from a council level. Once that technology is available, is there any sort of policy guidance from the council in terms of which committees are able to still continue to meet in some sort of hybrid or completely virtual Zoom option, and which ones we're going to ask to be in person in the council chambers with the ability to do a Zoom or a hybrid for those that want to participate virtually. Something I think we actually tabled at a council meeting maybe a month or so ago. So I just wanted to provide the council with some space to talk about it this afternoon. I get that we're running a little close to our 4 o'clock end time, so if there needs to be more discussion on this, we've got time for today. We can schedule it for an additional discussion, but just wanted to give you that space so we can get that direction.
Does anyone have any further thoughts about this since we discussed it as an announcement?
In thinking about the hybrid meetings, it came to me that allowing all committees and council to do the hybrid meetings at any time would allow us to be more diverse as a body. Given that if someone would have trouble with mobility, for example, they could still be on a committee and contribute. And I think that's something that we haven't said out loud, but we need to consider.
well, I know someone on public transit, and transit dependent, if he were to come to, be required to be in person, he would have to walk because our public transportation doesn't run that day. He had to walk like a 3-mile loop just to get to the meeting. I don't think that makes sense. In that frame. Alderman Merrill?
Thank you. Well, I've said this before, and I'll probably say it again. I do think that council, finance, personnel, and planning commission need to be in person. But I feel strongly that all the others should be given the chance to decide on their own. You know, the sustainability committee tried to resume in-person meetings when the council, or one of the conference rooms in City Hall. And at one point, it was just me and Kelly Hilliard in the room, because everybody else was zooming in, you know, to make it a hybrid, and we just decided this isn't really working, let's just go fully virtual. I do think there's value in maybe not requiring, but strongly encouraging all committees, commissions, and boards to hold one organizational meeting face-to-face, recognizing there might be mobility concerns that we need to be addressed. But just to have that face-to-face interaction one time with the new members, you know, so everybody gets a feel for who they're serving with. And then again, let them decide if they want to continue to be in person or all virtual. But I feel like as council members, we were getting into, I love that we have new technology that I trust will work flawlessly. But I see that technology as really, it's more intended to allow members of the public to join our meetings and make a comment and not have to go through one of us or submit a written comment. I see it as benefiting the public more than council members or planning commission members who don't, for whatever reason, can't show up in person.
I totally agree with that. And while I really, really think it's important to meet in person, I don't know that we should mandate any particular groups. We've had the mayor on the phone, right, many times.
Special situation, yes.
Right, and I think that it's important that we try to be in person, but that, what are we going to do if we say it's required and someone can't? I think we'd be more able to have a forum if we allow this hybrid technology.
Right now, we allow for 2 members to be remote and they still count towards the forum. This is how I look at it, is when the hybrid meeting and you're able to see the person, they're able to see the documents. It's a much more productive meeting than if somebody's on the phone and somebody wants to present a document. You are not, I don't feel you could be fully engaged not knowing what the document is. But
Versus Zoom, you're saying?
yeah, it's whether you call in, and there are going to be situations where people have to call in, you know, that would make sense. But I don't know if that's the same degree of engagement as if you're on the phone versus if you're Zooming. There was a comment made, like, if you're a member of the committee, you should have your video on, you should be showing that you are focused on the meeting, you're not up running and doing a lot of different other multitasking kinds of things. So I think there's a space there where if you're zooming, that I think it shows that you are there and you have access to all the documents, and I like that. I remember my brother-in-law, he had an accident and became neuralized, and when there were times he had to be on bed rest, and he was on the school board, and they were very accommodating to allow him. At that time, it was phone calls, but it was nice because he really was passionate about the school board, and he was able to continue serving even though he had to change in life change. So that's how I feel about it. I like the idea of having hybrid. I like the idea of being able to see the documents, share your desktop, and engage that way.
So, yeah, so I will start here. So if there is some state statute there really for a reason. So, yeah, in this case, this is the state statute which we want to amend or change. And now a couple of months ago or 2-3 months ago, when I had contacted other cities in Dane County, which includes Sun Prairie, Pittsburgh, Verona, and Monona. I did not contact at the time Madison. I haven't since then either. So they were all meeting in person for a while. They were thinking, what are you talking about? So I was just, and before the pandemic, everybody was meeting in person. There were no issues, period. So now these are the committees, we can still have, somebody can Zoom or be remote as long as the quorum is there. So I think, like Katie said, I did in 2 times. It was, I have to quarantine, so that's the reason. So now these are the committees which are already meeting in person, and I could be, you can correct if it is wrong. Plan Commission, City Council, Finance Committee, Personal Committee, Board of Review, and I don't know about the Fire Commission, but right now PRFC is meeting in person, and Parks, Recreation, Forestry, and Police Commission and Public Safety has been meeting in person. So,
Yeah, for a while.
and the Commission on Aging and the library has been meeting in person for a while. So there are probably even more. So the ones which I think are very important, I was just talking to Sean as well, the Public Works Committee and LNO, those are 2 which, and probably CDA. So I don't know, some of these committees may already be meeting in person, and I don't know if I have all the information. But what I would like is that at least 50% of the people must be there, if not the quorum, and the others could possibly participate remotely. So there's a different kind of interaction when you are in person versus when you are on a Zoom or on a telephone. So I think before we start changing these states, modifying our meetings and changing the state statute, I think we have to think about very seriously here. If the other cities can do it, and we have been doing it until before the pandemic, and pandemic is sort of going away, it's becoming endemic now, I don't really see any reason that we should have a charter ordinance 22.01 or whatever, 23.01. So I think if we do, at least half the people would have to be there. You can't just have just one person, maybe Sean sitting there and nobody else there. So I think we need some, I don't think that things have, it's the same kind of a thing with Zoom versus in person.
I can see this being a burden for staff, because right now they're worrying about this, are we gonna have quorum? And then it's gonna be, are we gonna have quorum, and who's gonna be a person, who's not gonna be quorum? And people's plans change.
I think we're going over into the weeds. We're gonna make this much more complicated than it needs to be. I agree with Lisa, and I've said several times that those of us who are elected have a responsibility to be in person. So at very minimum, any committees that are staffed by all alders, which there are some, that they should definitely be in person. So then the question becomes, what do we want to do with the rest of the committees? I think we're going to complicate things and get into just a mess if we decide to say, well, one committee can, because they decided to, they can be virtual, but the other committee decided they didn't want to. And did the committee that decided to meet virtual, do they have 50% of the people? Do they not have 50% of the people? So, while I understand the kind of the drive to have all virtual meetings with the opportunity for virtual meetings, I understand that. And I think it's good that we have the hybrid. I think the hybrid will allow people that are on vacation or that people that have the sniffles or the flu and want to attend a meeting but don't want to get anybody else sick have an opportunity to be involved. I think it's good for that. But I just think we're really mucking up the works if we decide to try to micromanage this. And it's either they're going to be, all committees are going to be virtual with the exception, and I won't vote for anything that doesn't have the alders in person, but either all committees are virtual or all committees are in person. It's just going to be way too confusing if we do it any other way.
You mean all committees, including personnel, finance,
Everything.
You mean everything, no exception of everything?
Just like we were before.
I'm asking for Dan to clarify that after Easter. You're pretty
I'm
tough.
sure enough as it is, I don't need any change.
So you're saying no differentiation, we have some committees that are made up of alders and other citizen committees with alders on them, of course, and everyone would be in person? Is that what
No,
you're saying?
what I'm saying is, this is my minimum. My minimum standard is any committee that is staffed strictly by alders.
Right.
Has to be in person.
Okay.
Okay, then for any other committees, because there's an alder on just about every committee,
Yes.
for any other committees, we either decide that they can be virtual, or we decide that they are going to be in person. But if we start mixing it up, I think we're just gonna create a mess.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to start or anything, but for, to make sure the meetings can be considered valid, could you guys potentially just allow a minimum of X amount of people could be virtual and then the rest of them be in person? Instead of all, and I think you kind of be somewhere in the middle.
The numbers would vary by quorum,
Yeah,
because the committee numbers would vary by committee. Like some of them are quite large, some of them are smaller, so quorum is based on the percentage of the number. So we can't just make it like, oh, as long as 5 are in person.
no, I mean like a physical number, but something like, say, 10% or 25% has to be there, or a percentage number because of that very
Yeah.
number.
I'm trying to get my head around what makes the meeting more effective if 20 or 25% are there or you're virtual? I don't understand that. I
agree.
If
I don't know
it's-
that the meeting is less productive if faces aren't in person or not.
But I will say, I think the meeting is less productive, or at least less efficient, takes more time and much more patience when people are not all in it together. And I would, with respect to the mayor and all of this art, I would say that both of our meetings in December suffered as a result of that. And maybe the new technology will make it work swimmingly. But
I think the phone
definitely-
call is a detriment for sure.
Yeah.
I think not having the ability to read what's happening. I thought that's why I said having that technology, having to be able to review what's going on. That's where I'm thinking that's what the minimum should be to count towards a quorum if you're at a remote meeting. You know, there's gonna be times you can't have video if you're in Tahiti somewhere. So, okay. Kendra, did you?
Having only been on the council, I think Randall and Lisa and I are experienced, well, you were on sustainability for a long time before, I believe. But I joined the committee during the pandemic. So my experience with that committee was only Zoom. And then I came on to council at the end, so I watched council remotely, which was an experience. And I commend you guys for doing that remotely, because to me that seemed difficult. And so, yeah, less than ideal. And so I was very happy that when I joined the council, we were able to be in person. I, for one, enjoyed meeting in person better. I read people better when I can see. There's something to be said about the interactions that happen when you're in person and not just on screen. But I also enjoy the fact that I also don't think that any of the committees that I've sat on since I've been on the council have been hindered by being remote. And they run the gamut from public works to the golf course. Landmarks, we've met once and it was in person because we were at a site visit. Telecom would be the one that I would say, I can see your point with, but it's not fully staffed by alders, but it's city staff and 3 alders. So I'm guessing that's what you're saying. With like the right, so the voting numbers, yeah. So, I could get behind what Dan was saying.
Plan commission, that was one that was taken, said
Oh,
we should,
yeah.
but we want to be able to have presenters present remotely. If you got an architect from Denver or something, you know, that, you know.
They would be able to, so once the hybrid technology is available, would still have the option to add a Zoom component to an in-person meeting. So for your example, the architect from Denver is Zoom meeting, show their image, show themselves on screen, so the council and the audience can see them, and they, staff could run whatever documents on the Zoom portion, so everyone can see the documents. Again, say the personal experience working, you know, now, we're running hybrid in-person meetings from the gamut of where we just need a council chamber, and all the council members were virtual to the other end of the spectrum. All the council and staff were, and residents were coming in virtually. Any option along that spectrum is going to have challenges from just a staff management of the meeting, because you've got someone trying to take minutes at the same time. They're working with Zoom hybrid component, trying to pay attention to council members in person. We have to raise their hands for questions. So it just, there is no perfect solution, because if there was, we would have picked it 6 months ago. So I just throw that out there.
So are we just kind of looking for flavor here, or what do we?
Maybe my suggestion would be, so I will work on putting together maybe 2 policies, option 1, option 2. Option 1 would be for basically Alder Ramsey's suggestion, and then option 2 would be, but for whatever committees. Option 1 would be the city council identified committees; those would absolutely be in person, and we write that in the policy, so be very clear which committees we're saying have to be in person, with a hybrid option for those that need to participate in person. Then the other committees, the council can decide, do you want to, as you said, all or nothing? Do you want to have all other committees have to meet in person with the hybrid option? Second policy that we can talk about is the option where the city council related committees would be in person, and then it's, all the other committees have the option solely virtually. You could decide amongst those 2 policies and change the language, whichever way you want. At least you have something in front of you to react to that. I'm not asking you to do this, but try to write something on the fly in 15 minutes.
So how about the third one, do nothing? I mean, this is, you're taking a very major step, amending the state statute here. And other cities.
We would not be amending state statute as it relates to this.
It's set up, okay, so we are still modifying or doing something to enable it. If we were to follow the state statute, that's the open meeting laws, right? So that means we'll be meeting in person, period, unless we have some sort of a reason. Like earlier, we had that emergency declaration. If we have some similar situation, I wouldn't have any problem, having virtual. But outside of that, I don't see any reason why, what has changed since March 20th, March 20th until now, so.
Right, and we're not suggesting that the council could be completely virtual. We're just providing flexibility in cases in which a few council members couldn't maybe be in person. The expectation would always be that the council would be in person. If they couldn't, then it would be an option for them to zoom in and figure out whatever that language needs to be to make that happen from a form standpoint. But again, what I'm hearing from the council is that there are a certain number of committees where you absolutely set the expectation that it's in person, which has been consistent over the last couple of months. So I think we're all in agreement.
Our emergency declaration ends on March 1. So essentially, then we have February to come to a decision, whatever that is, which should be at the next meeting, because then if we have to write a ordinance, we need time to get that through. So this will be on our next agenda then.
I think that your 2 options are really great. And I think we also need to appreciate that a lot did change during the pandemic, and we all learned how to use Zoom. And we shouldn't ignore that this technology exists. So we're not going back to buggy whips, if you will. And I'm sorry that I'm certain that there will be another pandemic of some sort in the future. So I think it's just wise to have it as an option for the committees that we don't need to be all in person. So I like Brian's options a lot.
I was just going to ask, so confirm the quorum for council is 6. So in the year that, or almost a year that I've been on, we've never had a problem of.
And we cancel once a week.
Right, and that includes when all of starts participating on the site. Because I just, again, feel strongly that, as dedicated as we all are to this work, if you're in Tahiti or the hospital or with sniffles, you should be taking care of yourself or enjoying your vacation. I just don't want anyone to be like, well, now we've got the technology, so I
So
should be
you
calling
can't
it
miss.
else.
I get
You
it.
know?
It's just an option that's there for you though, that's nice. Well, I just want to comment, is I don't know when the ordinance was written, the state ordinance was written, but technology has constantly changed over the time, and we have to embrace that. I mean, it's been having more public participation, making it easy for them, and then making it easy for the council, not council, but for the community members too. Anyway.
And anything we decide to do, there's going to be hybrid, so
Right.
we are opening up the venue for the public to participate.
Yeah.
From the comfort of their home.
It's nice. We are looking at, even though the ordinance was written when there's a telephone, we know what's somewhere else. Abby, you look like you've got something interesting.
I'm just young.
Okay. That says a lot. Okay, so you're gonna write something up? Okay, excellent, thank you. The next item, we have discussion of prioritizing strategic plan action items for 2023.
Okay, so I will believe that this, so now that we've got the strategic plan adopted, I would say that this first year of the plan will be a growth experience for all of us, because we haven't had a plan before. So given that we've only got, about half an hour or so of time, I don't expect us to walk away with a full prioritization of what's going on, but I at least want to provide you some space to start that conversation. There's any number of ways to kind of figure out what the council's priority is. I gave you an example in the memo from Bill Burns on one way to kind of take some key themes that we have going on in the city. We talked about a lot of those items this afternoon. If you use that as a framework to kind of tap some action items too. But that's not the only way the council can decide to do it. This may require a couple meetings for us to get comfortable with this. We get a list of we need to at least start this conversation. To talk with my colleague in Farmland about their experience down their plan. And they actually had 4 meetings in which they spent a lot of time figuring out how we get from plan to actual action plan. I'm not suggesting we want to go down to a level of detail, but I think it's good for us to at least start the conversation this afternoon. Staff can kind of take some of that dialogue and come back with some options for you. So leave it up to the council to give some direction and commentary on where you'd like to go. It's back over to Wilson.
Anyone else? Anyone have come? I just wanted to make this clear. We're going to be prioritizing what's in the strategic plan. And I think we have a really great opportunity with the hiring of a communication person and being able for them to, let's survey our constituents, let's survey the city. I mean, I think that would be right in the needs that and then we could use that to frame how our priorities are going to come to be. Not this year, but I think in this fall, we should look at having that community survey again. The communication specialist will have ways to get that pushed out to the different populations, and I'd like to see that as part of, I can't tell you how many times I think of the airport survey and how that was so helpful for me when I was looking back, what do people really think about this and how, and it was isolated in a way that you could see what Middleton citizens are, and that's where I think focus it. But I think we got a great opportunity with the communication specialist to make this a good way to prioritize the strategic plan. Chandra?
I 100% agree with you on that. Do we have an update on where we are?
Yeah, so between staff and I, we're working on crafting that job description as we speak. It's taken a little bit longer because we want to be very intentional about it. It's a very unique skill set, and there are some communities in Dade County that have it. There's some communities across the state that have the position or some variation of it, but there's not a lot. And so I've been spending some time talking to colleagues who have that position, figure out how did they craft the position to make it interesting and enticing to potential applicants. How do we frame their job responsibilities so we get somebody that can actually do the 1,000 things that we're going to ask the person to do and be realistic about what we can ask the person to do. So we hope to have that posted in early February, depending on some other things that are going on with the staffing and schedules. But we'd like to get it posted in February. It'd be about a 3 to 4 week project, and then hopefully have some hired early.
Okay.
So I like what Wasn't said, but I went through this, there's so much there. I mean, this is, so I think, could you actually come up with some sort of a framework, some suggestion based on, I looked at some of the things, okay, we should be doing in 1 to 2 years, so there are 2 to 3 years. So if you were to just look at the timeline by itself, you could probably see if you want to do it in 1 or 2 years, you probably want to get ready and be doing now. Or we are going to even change that. That's one way I was thinking that we could possibly do that. That means those are probably more important than the others. So I think I would like for you guys to come up with some sort of a, outline, and then let's have a look at it rather than this all big detail here. So, and then also the reason why, why that's important. But in the end, the community survey would have what people want as well.
What I wanted to suggest is similar to what we did with Conservancy again. We have the strategic plan. There are 8 of us on council, and 8 of us have different priorities and different. I think that we each should take a time to do the exercise and do our ranking, and then submit them. That shows and puts it on the record what our priorities are, where we're at with that, and then we can do a ranking exercise and help come up with. And it wouldn't be at the next council meeting, but it would force everybody to make sure that you're looking at that strategic plan. You're setting your priorities. We've done things like, sustainability. Okay, we have sustainability. We all love sustainability, but what about truck or whatever? We got to weigh. This is where we have to balance our needs, and I think this would be a good way. Everybody would have an equal voice, and you can pull your constituents or however you want to do it. But I think that having it made available and what your priorities are would be a very good step.
I agree. Thank you. That's great.
I agree with that as well, but I do also appreciate the grouping that the staff came up with, and seeing how you all.
Just because this example from finance. You speak for us.
Okay.
I'm not, that's not.
Well, I mean, you lead me to my point actually, which is, again, I'll go back and say, I think Vanderwall had the obligation to do what the mayor describes in this strategic plan. That's what the strategic plan was supposed to be, taking the comp plan and turning that into a timeline, a more refined timeline that we have currently in the comp plan. So we didn't get that. And it does fall on us now, but I think it's also important to hear how the staff would prioritize activities within their departments, and also the committees, commissions, and boards that are responsible. I'll give you an example. The Water Resources Management Commission, if I showed them the comp plan and said, how would you prioritize the 29 actions that are in the front of the document that relate to storm flood control and water resources management, they would have a lot to say. If I shared the strategic plan, which really has almost no mention of flood control other than potentially hiring a stormwater dedicated stormwater position. That's kind of shocking to me that I missed this in reviewing the draft, because this is now the 5th anniversary of the flood of 2018, and it seems like if we have 29 actions in the comp plan that are devoted to flood control, stormwater management, and water resources management, we need to build that into our strategic plan for the year. And so that was like the only category of action that I would have added to the list that our finance department prepared. But I can tell you, as I go through, because I have gone through both documents quite a lot, and as I go through, I look for opportunities to bring in comp plan actions. Again, these are written, the comp plan was written by our staff. They're the ones doing the work. So I trust their judgment, and I look for ways to take what we got from our consultant and bring in the comp plan actions so that we're not, not duplicating efforts, just consolidating everything that we're doing. And I'm thrilled to hear that we've got the communication specialist position coming in, because I think that's going to be important.
And the comp plan, the staff, they reached out and got a lot of input too, not just the staff writing it, but they reached out to every committee that was multiple times. So I think that it was a lot of input.
Appreciate that feedback on having staff provide some input, because again, we wanted to provide you this opportunity to weigh first, we didn't want to presuppose. Because again, it's happened in other communities where staff says, these are the priorities, and then it's a disagreement between staff and council. So having heard what you said, and we can spend some time as a staff group kind of talk about from both timeline, resources and personnel, what things we think are feasible in 23 and 24, and bring that back for further discussion.
And doing that in tandem with what you would
Everyone should be looking at the document and coming up with your priorities. I think it's so important for everybody to weigh in on this.
And help me understand, is that then to be driving next year's budget allocation? Is that the intent, or is it
Yeah.
driving the policy on this year? What's
You know, and because we're kind of in this weird period of when the plan was adopted and are familiar with it, in an ideal world, the decisions we make today, and we don't have to do that, you would be driving the work plan, if you will, for 23 for staff. Saying, staff, here are the 5 things that we absolutely love. Everything else, we want you to focus on these 5 things. Everything else that comes in on a daily basis, we have to deal with it, but again, these 5 things, or whatever the number is, those are the priority. That might be a little bit different this year because it's the first year plan. So I think you're doing both. You're saying with the remainder of 23, what are the things we want to focus on? But with a look ahead to 24 in our budget process this summer, what are the things that we need to be thinking about from a budgetary standpoint? So as you make those decisions in the fall, that then gives signals to staff saying, okay, if they're funding X, Y, and Z priorities, those are things that we will focus on in 24.
As the strategic plan has been available for a while now, we might be seeing things like you want to make some changes, like, is this a really good metrics? Is this and like you mentioned with the stormwater, is there enough in here that's going to direct that? But there are things, we can make edits, I think, sometimes.
This plan is ours, and so we own the document, it's a living document, so we can make, we have the native documents to name each piece that we need to. One thing we did talk about is exactly is the metric question you just raised. Some of the metrics in there are output or widget based, so doing a certain activity at certain times. That is a interesting, not always sometimes useful stat. So sometimes you need to take it a couple levels further, define its efficiency and impact. So it may be the case that with more time to get out of the plan, we can revise the metrics to be more specific and more useful to the council when making decisions. It means that for the first year of this plan, we probably won't have a good idea of how to start collecting data on that. So that would be obviously we continue to work on as we look at this plan, but that is something that as staff spends more time to plan, council spends more time to plan, those output measures will likely change.
Excuse me, one edit I would really appreciate, I see that on the screen you can see Bill's assigned numbers, affordability goals 2-1, 2-2. Those, correct me if I'm wrong, that's not actually in the strategic plan, right? I mean, it does say affordability and you can look at goal 2, but you had to assign numbers, right?
Right, yeah, they weren't in the table, so I was just saying first.
It would be wonderful if we could fix that so that it's actually specified, add a column to show. I know they need to, sometimes people get bogged down in like the code for the actions in the comp plan, but they help you find what you're looking for and help us all talk about the same thing. So that would be really useful. We have that.
In, one of the things that we have to look at when we're thinking about this is, Abby brought this up earlier when she asked she said, I sure would like this to be part of the plan moving forward. And one of the things that we have to look at is if we say that as a campus as a priority or something that we want to work on, understand that works on not just the campus, but it's also sustainability. It's also, it's all across the, and so, that's if we decide to go with community campus, that's kind of a big bang kind of deal for us as far as the rest of our strategic plan. So when you're ranking things, it might be a good idea to kind of say, what do we get cross advantages to? How do we get our biggest bang for our buck? without staff chasing down, well, this was from sustainability, this was from this. You know what I'm trying to say? As much as we can, let's look at things that are multi-dimensional.
That's a great point, because when we put together what we want, and then have the staff feedback by it, it's like, if it's all hitting sustainability, you know, that's not gonna work either. So, and having that staff feedback too. That's a great point. Okay. So what next steps here, will we put together a kind of a list for us to kind of?
In the interim period, again, spend some more time to plan as you have time available, and we'll do some sort of priority ranking activity at some point in the future.
Okay, does that happen at another committee of the whole meeting then?
Probably. I mean, we could do it on the same night that we've got another council meeting or something scheduled. Okay. You know, like I'm going to suggest, it's probably going to be early March. How we will do that.
Okay, next item, discussion of council meeting agenda organization.
So, Madam Chair, members of council, I put this on the agenda just to provide a space to talk about an idea I had and any other ideas that you might have about the council agenda itself. I didn't want to put something on a future agenda without having to run by you. But one of the things I've heard from feedback, just meeting with you individually over the last couple of months, is there's not, the way our agenda is laid out today, there's not a way for you as an agenda item to have discussion amongst yourself as council members, getting an update on the various committees that you sit on. So if something interesting or important is happening in a committee, there's not space on the agenda today for you to say, hey, planning commission, we've got these projects coming down the pipe, just want the council to be aware of, and by extension, the public to be aware of this meeting that's coming up on February 8th or whatever. So my suggestion would be, if the council's okay with this, I would add it for upcoming council meeting on February 7th. They would just read, a work in the verbiage, but basically just saying that city council representative committee report, something along those lines, just to give you space on the agenda. Not to say that you have to provide a report at every meeting, but it's just there so that it can be talked about. It was something we did in Winona, and there were often times where a committee hasn't met, so a council member didn't have an update. They just said, no update this month, and they come back next month. But that allows for that inter-committee dialogue, if you will, so everyone's.
I think that's excellent.
Is
Yes.
there any fear of, like, when somebody okay, this is what's happening, basically, they would be reading some of the things that happen in the minutes, because most committees get the minutes out fairly quickly. But is there any chance, like, there'd be trying to be conversation outside of an agenda item? Like, I don't want, the council shouldn't be weighing in on these.
Correct, yeah, it's more of an update information only item, so just to say, yeah, no saying, well, I disagree with this project that planning commission's. Again, that's not the point of it, it's just to say, here's what we've talked about, here's the recommendations we've acted on, here's the things that are coming up on future agendas, just so everyone's.
I think it's important to hear what future agenda items are, especially if they are impacting your district, your constituents, or your committee, just to make sure that you're on top of that. It's more important probably to know what's on the agenda than what the results are. So, I'll be clear.
I just want to say thank you. I really like this idea. And the reason it strikes me is when there was a recent TIF update for the Arts District, if I remember correctly. And when the chair came to talk to us, she said, oh, we've been talking about this for 2 years. And I read the memo, I was ready to vote. But it was like 2 years. Where did I miss this? And, it could be partly because of the pandemic. I wasn't doing my extra reading. And that would be something that the person sitting there could just give us a heads up and that we would dig in. I know it's the same thing probably today when I talked about the senior center. You may not have all been aware that there's this other opportunity. And it may be a way to reduce some costs and expand some options. But it would be a way for me to present on the senior center so that we don't have to wait till the committee of the whole and just do it in a 2-minute briefing. And so that way, even if it's 4 months later, we're still talking about this. This goal is to what this looks like. It would be short. So, and public safety, I sit on public safety, and most of the time we just talk about statistics and crime rates and where trend analysis is, and that we're on top of things. That would be nice for you guys to hear. That's a short report that we are responding to, questions, concerns quickly, and we move forward. So I appreciate it, and I can't wait to hear the other alders, committees, assignment topics, because there's just so much that we can all know.
Alderman Narrow?
Thanks. I really like this idea. I do think though, we have a lot of committees and I'm wondering, you know, we can try it out and see like what if we're 20 reports, maybe we need to assign a particular meeting or month or something like that. I also would want to leave it open to not just have the alders present, but I think, and this came up months ago in discussion, I think Alder Q brought it up, just, you know, hearing from the committees. I think of hearing from like the chair or other committee members so that we, you know, just start looped into what they're doing and get to know folks. Also, in preparing for this meeting, I mean, our order of business in section 1.02 of our municipal code does have reports of committees as one of the items. And it goes further in 1.04.2 on committee reports. It says that each standing committee shall submit to the common council a written report of all matters considered by or referred to it. Such report shall, whenever feasible, recommend definite action on each item included in the report. And then it goes on to mention that the standing committees are finance, personnel, public works, and L&O. We have not done that since I've been on council, and so I'm not suggesting we do it, I'm just suggesting we update our ordinance to reflect what we think is a good process for committee reports.
And I remember when on sustainability, but even when Abby was chairing it, and that was, different members from, didn't have to be chair, didn't have to be, you know, just turns, just bringing up, just highlighting what's going on. It was very informative and keeping it in front of the council. These are doing something.
And sometimes the library has come with that.
Yes, exactly, yes.
And I think it creates a bit of pipeline for people who appear before council now and then and start to think about, well, maybe we'll be interested in that. So that's.
Anyone else?
Good idea, Brian.
I think we should try it.
Yes. Something,
Just the cool stuff.
something coming from another, that's good.
Okay. So, and is there anything else that we haven't needed to go over again or? Okay. We need a motion to adjourn.
This is Alder Q, I'll make that motion.
Yes, second.
Motion at second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See you.
Putting all the time and work in.
That's at 5, right?
Yeah.